This didn't happen to me, but to a friend who went hiking to Mount Lawu in Java, Indonesia. Mount Lawu is considered a sacred place by the locals, and people believe it is one of, if not the most haunted mountains in Java. Many people have got lost up there too, and some have never been found. One case in particular, which I recall, is the disappearance of a young boy named Alvin, who went hiking up there with some of his friends on New Year's Eve a few years ago and just vanished without a trace. The rescue party gave up after weeks of combing the slopes trying to find him. He was last seen by other hikers near Pasar Dieng, the market or Devil's Market, an empty grassland near the top where many hikers have reported hearing mysterious disembodied voices, hence the name of Pasar Satan. A few years ago, though, my friend and two other hikers, they decided to climb the mountain. There are several marked trails by which you get to the top of the mountain. The busiest one is Candi Ceto, because it is one of the easier trails to pick and the scenery up there is breathtaking. But the ascent, it takes a bit longer. It is a footpath that gradually ascends through pine forests, grasslands and whatnot. He and the two rookie through hikers took this trail. It was his first climb to the top of the mountain. They had met on a hiker forum months before and decided to take the easier trail since the other two guys had never attempted a mountain of this caliber before. It wasn't one of those busy days when they arrived and there were only a handful of other hikers around. Their trip went smoothly at first, but soon they were joined by two other hikers from a nearby city. After they broke through the thicket and passed through Pasar Dieng, my friend began to feel a little bit uneasy. And then he noticed something a little off with our hiking group. There were now 6 of them. Somebody else had joined them unnoticed, which was weird. He looked around and stared at his fellow hikers one by one, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary. They all looked familiar to him, which was obviously very confusing. He couldn't seem to recognize the odd one out, no matter how many times he counted and scrutinized their faces. And to make it even worse, he seemed to be the only one who had noticed this. He asked himself if he was becoming disoriented due to the exhaustion or the cold perhaps, and that was when he started seeing glimpses of blurry silhouettes moving around them. He wanted to quit at this point. He no longer felt excited about this hike. He didn't feel like he was going to make it another hour, but there was really nothing that he could do. They were already halfway to the top, and he was sure that he would have had no choice but to return alone if he decided to turn back anyway. He had lost his bearings too. He had no idea where he was or who he was with. When they finally reached the top, though, he just collapsed in a heap. According to his friends, he then became delirious and started speaking of random creepy things like when being followed by something and someone watching them in the fog. He even told them to just leave him there because he was going to die anyway and to let his parents know how much he missed them and loved them. It took them a few hours to calm him down and for him to regain his strength, and then they decided to set up camp for the night. But the other guys also couldn't sleep that night. They said that they could feel a presence with them. When the first lights of the day appeared in the sky, they quickly dismantled the tents and they packed away everything and began their descent, which luckily only took a few hours down the slope until they made it safely back to base camp. My friend had to be rushed to the hospital, burning up with fever. He had made it through the night and down the mountain, but others just like him, they weren't so lucky. I'm wondering though if anybody has ever experienced this other hiker phenomenon or something similar while climbing a mountain or trekking through the wilderness or something. It's something that I've never really heard anyone else talk about, and it's really creepy. I'm a nurse at a palliative care unit in an old hospital. Throughout my years working at this hospital, I've seen a lot, especially being in a palliative care unit. You see a lot of things other people wish they wouldn't. For some of us, at some point, we just have to accept things as they are, I guess. But the unit that I worked in has 9 beds in 9 different bedrooms, all spread along a sort of long corridor. At the start of the corridor is the lift, and coming out of it, you'd find the cleaning room on your right, where we keep all the cleaning equipment and products, and the nurse's room on your left, along with the entrance through to the stairs. Because of the building and patient safety, and so we can access the other floors easily if in need, the administration forbade us from locking the stairs doors. This isn't ideal because some of our patients, in their delusions, can go across our room's door unnoticed and will be in danger to themselves or others, so we always keep the doors closed by tying a bedsheet around the door handles just to keep them together. This is important as well because you need to know this as to what comes next, because it's going to start to sound really strange. So, the nurse's room is where we'll spend most of the night shifts doing all kinds of activities, including resting and actually sleeping. Usually, late at night, my routine would include checking on all our patients, checking on all the doors and windows, and to make sure that they're all locked properly, checking on the doors as well to the stairs, and then spend most of the night checking patients' files. This night in particular, I'd finished with my rounds and was checking on all the cameras. When my nursing auxiliary came into the nurse's room, she asked me if anything else was needed or if she was okay to sleep for a while. I told her that she was fine to go to sleep, so she took her shoes off, laid down with her back to the room and me facing the wall, and went to sleep. I was reading a new patient's file, who was coming into our unit soon, to know what to expect and how to behave around him, when I started hearing footsteps walking up and down the unit's corridor. At first I just ignored them, thinking that I must be really tired, and that my ears were playing tricks on me. I mean, it really wouldn't be the first time by any means. As they persisted though, I started wondering what was going on. I took another look at the cameras, but each and every one of the bedroom and corridor feeds seemed completely normal. The steps though kept coming all the way to the nurse's room, stopping about 2 steps away from showing at my door, then turning around and walking back all the way to the opposite end of the corridor. I waited to see if anything changed, but when it didn't, I stood up to go and check it out. That's when one of our patients, the one in room number 7, started calling us frantically. My auxiliary nurse was still asleep, so I walked carefully out of the room, peeked out of the room and looked around. There was nothing there and the footsteps had stopped, so I rushed to the patient's room. When I got there, he was shouting frantically, huddling against the bed's headboard with what seemed like renewed energy, shouting at me to tell the man in the top hat sitting on the chair in the room to go away and leave him be. Now, usually with patients like these in this state of stress, we just sort of go along with their delusions to calm them down. If there are nurses watching, which I hope there are, then you'll know what I mean. In this case though, with him screaming in the room, I turned towards the chair and started to talk to this imaginary man in a top hat, telling him that he needed to go, that the visiting hours were done and that he needed to leave right now, or we'd have to call security. After this, the patient calmed down, thanked me profusely for sending the man away, and laid back down to rest. After which I went back to the nurse's room and back to studying the new patient. As I walked back in, my heart stopped though. All I felt was panic gripping my heart inside of me. As I stood there not knowing what to do and looking at the surveillance cameras, there was a big shadow standing right in the middle of the frame of the camera recording the end of the corridor, right in front of the bedroom that I had just been in. I took one step back and leaned backward to check if I could see anything there, but there was nothing. I gave the cameras another quick glance and the shadow was still there, standing terrifyingly still in front of this patient's bedroom door. This time though, when I turned to look directly at the corridor again, this thing was there. For a moment, it felt like everything froze in place and I just stood there looking at it like a fool. Then slowly, it turned towards me, a pair of strange dark red eyes showing. It stood like that for a bit, screeched at me, and flew into the patient's bedroom, slamming the door behind it. My auxiliary nurse jumped awake at the slam of the door and started frantically asking me what was going on. I was out of breath by now. I told her what I had just seen and what had just happened, and She didn't believe me. I asked her to come with me to the patient's bedroom. She agreed, starting to become curious. We walked slowly through the corridor, passing every door carefully. I was afraid that anything would come flying at us at this point. When we got to the bedroom this thing flew into, I pushed the door without going in to check for any kind of danger and immediately felt a breath of freezing air hit my face. The aircon was on in every room and set to 23 degrees, so this was not normal. Nothing came flying at us like I was afraid would happen, but there, right by the patient's bed, there was this shadow. I could tell that it was a man, tall and strong with a top hat over his head. I asked my auxiliary nurse if she could see him, not expecting a no. However, that's exactly what I got. She couldn't see anything standing there, and definitely not as clear as I could. Slowly, the shadow turned towards me again. This time it didn't scream. This time it slowly dissipated. Immediately I calmed down. Not only could I not see it anymore, I couldn't feel it either. This sense of calm came over me, and the patient seemed okay, so in the end we left the room and went back to the nurse's room. My colleague went back to sleep, but I didn't rest until I checked the rest of the unit to make sure that everyone was safe. After that, I couldn't help but stare at the cameras every minute for the rest of the night. Eventually our shift was over and would become the shift with the most intense experience that I had ever had. The next day, when nighttime came and I did all my rounds, I went inside room 7 to check on the patient. When I came closer, I realized that he had passed away. This was my first experience with the Shadow Man and the Top Hat, but it certainly was not the last, and it is still ongoing. I'm the only one who can see him apparently from around the unit, which freaks everyone out. Every single time that I see him, it's under the same circumstances as well. I walk into a patient's room, and there's this shadow at the feet of their bed. I wait for a little bit, until he turns to me and then dissipates. And 1 or 2 days later, the patient always passes away. This is a real story, and it's something that I have to live with almost every day now. I'm not sure if this thing is killing people or announcing their deaths, but if you're a nurse in a similar unit or know someone who is, please share this with them and comment what you know about it. I need to know what this is, how to deal with it, and if anybody else has experienced the same as me, even if it's a different looking thing or entity or whatever. I can keep you updated on here too, if people are engaging and want to know more, that is. Do let me know if you guys want to hear more, and I'll make sure to bring any more future experiences to you. But if you're dealing with something like this yourself, then please know that you are not the only one. Maybe this will help you feel less afraid. G'day mates, it's B-Buster here. So I wanted to just let you guys know that Wondery's shocking true crime podcast, Over My Dead Body, is back for a 4th season, Gone Hunting. The newest season covers the story of Mike Williams. It was Mike's 6th wedding anniversary when he set off on a hunting trip into the gator-infested swamps of North Florida. He figured that he'd be back in time to take his wife, Denise, out to celebrate, but he never came back. Friends and loved ones feared that he met his fate through bad luck and a group of hungry alligators, leaving his young family behind. Except, that's not what happened at all. And after 17 years, a kidnapping, and the uncovering of a secret love triangle, the truth would finally be revealed. Enjoy Over My Dead Body Gone Hunting on the Wondery app or wherever you get your podcasts. You can binge all episodes of Over My Dead Body early and ad-free on Wondery Plus. Get started with your free trial at wondery.com/plus. So my great-grandpa fought in World War II. He was drafted in 1943 when he was 23. He's 103 years old now, and just a few days ago he told me a story that he says was the most horrifying experience that he's had in his life. I asked if it was about Japanese soldiers because Those guys were vicious back in the day. He told me no. Apparently it was something else. I don't know if this story is true or not, but whatever the case, it definitely gave me chills. Feel free to debunk this if you want. He said that nobody ever believed their story, but he still remembers it clear as day, and it still gives him nightmares to this day. So, in 1943, he was stationed in the Philippines, along with others, to hold off the Japanese. However, one day, he and his friend Samuel, who unfortunately passed away decades ago, got separated from their platoon. They were in a province, making their way through the forest within the mountain area, when they both got lost and were separated. Great-grandfather, who I'll refer to as Gigi from now on, forgot which province it was, but he said that there were a lot of forests and villages. So he and Samuel were looking and calling out for their comrades. They ventured deeper and deeper until they reached the end of the forest. I did ask him, why didn't you just radio for your platoon? But he told me that they did, but for some unknown reason the communications were scrambled and unintelligible. It concerned both him and Samuel, but Samuel said that they needed to keep calm and tread carefully in case they run into Japanese soldiers. So they both made it out of the forest, but then they noticed that the sun was about to set. Gigi told Samuel that they needed to set up a camp, and Samuel agreed. That's when Gigi noticed something off in the distance. It was a small wooden hut. They both decided to camp inside of it, so they made their way over to the hut. They knocked on the door and checked the place, but there was no sign of people anywhere. But there were clothes scattered around the place. Gigi says that maybe they fled in a panic, to which Samuel agreed with him. So Gigi and Samuel set up camp and ate dinner. Samuel proposed the idea of taking shifts throughout the night to keep a lookout, just in case they get shagged in their sleep by the Japanese. Gigi agreed to the idea, and so that's what they did. They both woke each other up and took each place as lookout while the other person slept. While Gigi was sleeping, Samuel abruptly woke him up at one point and told him that he'd spotted movement. Gigi quickly grabbed his rifle and asked him where. Samuel gave the binoculars to Grandpa and pointed in the direction. "I saw them in the field, 300 yards away," Samuel said. Gigi looked through the binoculars in the direction Samuel pointed at. At first, he didn't see anything, but then he spotted something moving in the dark. However, when Gigi looked closer, it was just a wild boar. "It's just a pig," Grandpa told Samuel. Samuel took the binoculars to see for himself. "Huh, that's weird. It's just standing there," Samuel said. Grandpa looked at Samuel in confusion and asked what he meant. Samuel then said that the boar wasn't moving or anything. It was just standing there, staring at them from afar, and that it was starting to weird him out a bit. Grandpa just laughed it off and told Samuel that it was probably just his mind playing tricks on him. But then something odd happened. The oil lamp that served as their source of light inside the hut started to slowly go out. Grandpa went over to light it back up, then afterward went back to his sleeping bag. But then the light suddenly went out again. Gigi checked up on it again, thinking that the oil probably went out. But the strange thing was that there was still plenty of oil. Well, Gigi lit it back up again and went back to sleep, but then the flame went out yet again. That's when a terrified Samuel frantically went up to him and said, "It's gone." "What are you talking about?" Gigi asked him. "The pig. It just disappeared into, thin air." At this point, Grandpa was also starting to get freaked. Gigi then asked him to explain. Samuel said that he was watching the boar through the binoculars when it suddenly just vanished out of existence. Suddenly, as they were talking, a loud thud came from above them, as if something landed on the roof. Gigi and Samuel grabbed their rifles. "We need to get out of here," Samuel said. And this is the part in the story where my grandpa said that the rest of the events that happened, he believes are one of the worst nightmares in his entire life. Gigi told Samuel not to panic, to lay low and to stay quiet, and so they did, while tightly gripping their guns close. After a few minutes of silence, Samuel started screaming though. Grandpa turned on his light and he said that he saw something that he'll never forget. Something straight out of a horror movie. Something that looked like a tongue that was lodged into Samuel's neck. His friend was screaming in pain, trying to remove it from his neck. Gigi snapped out of his shock and shot at the ceiling multiple times, trying to hit whatever the tongue belonged to. After a few more shots, the tongue released to Samuel and slowly retracted back into the hole on the ceiling. Samuel was gripping the side of his neck tightly while screaming, blood trickling down his neck now. Grandpa put a cloth against the wound and told him to keep pressure on it. Afterwards, they collected all their things, exited the cabin, and made a break for it. Grandpa turned around and shined his light on the hut's roof, and what he saw, he described as the most evil-looking and ugliest thing that he's ever seen. I asked him to describe what it looked like once, and apparently it was humanoid. It had 2 gigantic wings that were bigger than its own body. The wings looked like a combination of a bat's and a hawk's. Its eyes were blood red and glowed in the dark, skin as black as coal, wild, unkempt hair, and huge fangs that were visible even though its mouth was closed. Whatever it was just perching on the roof, staring at them. Grandpa acted quickly. He raised his rifle and began shooting at the thing, unloading all the rounds in the gun's chamber. Samuel also did the same thing. But to their astonishment, the monster was unfazed. It just continued to stare at them, unbothered. At that point, Gramps and Samuel started screaming like maniacs while running for the hills. By some miracle, the creatures didn't pursue them. They were both so scared that they didn't care if they run into the enemy as long as they didn't encounter this thing again. They managed to make it till morning and came across a small village where they rested. That's when they learned from one of the locals that what attacked them was apparently called an aswang, and that they were very common in the countryside. The locals told them that they were all in God's favor because they survived. After a couple of days, they were eventually reunited with their platoon. When they told the story, only a few believed them, while the others thought that they were probably drunk and ran into the enemy gunfire, hence the injury on Samuel's neck. After the war ended, they all went home, but he could never forget that horrifying encounter that gave him severe PTSD to this day. Samuel unfortunately passed away in his 80s due to a stroke. Now, like I said, I really don't know what to believe, but his story honestly freaked me out. In fact, I just spent the past hour Googling aswangs just to figure out more information. But what do you guys think about all of this? Do you think it's possible, or do you think it's all just made up? I, a 23-year-old female, am going to start back to when my father, 63-year-old male, was a child. He told me about when he would lie in bed, that a beautiful woman would float above him, asking or begging him to come with her. As the nights went on, she would get uglier though. Still, she begged him to leave with her. As he grew older and he grew more occupied with school and work, she seemed to visit him less often. Fast forward though, me and my twin are babies, my older sister, 6 and female, is playing with us. She sees orbs around us and calls for my dad to check it out. The orbs suddenly disappear though. Fast forward a bit more and me and my twin are teenagers in a different house. I have my own bedroom at this point. There were many nights that someone would sit on my bed and lay their hand on my shoulder, whispering to me, "Please open your eyes." I would see a figure in the corner of my room, and it would always freak me out. Fast forward again, and I live in a different state. My twin, 23-year-old male, still lives with mum and dad in a new house. The dogs will not go down a specific hallway. One dog will cry at night, randomly. There are knocks on the bedroom window, someone is walking in the attic, walking in the hallway. My twin brother says that it talks to him constantly. It also breathes on him. It sits on his bed, even sits in the car with him. He once asked, "How long have you been around?" And it replies, "Since you were babies." My brother says that he's sure that there's at least 2 of them, the main one having followed us around all our lives. I'm curious though as to if anyone has had a similar story. Did you ever find out what it was? Was it good, neutral, evil? Why do you think that it's, attached to my brother like this? And is there anything that we can do about it? Most of my life I've seen things, whether it's shadows out of the corner of my eye or just as I'm drifting to sleep, or felt the presence of something that I can't see. I've been grabbed, shoved, and even heard whispers. None of that, though, compares to my frequent visitor for several years. Back in 2017, I was 23 years old. I had just broken up with a long-term girlfriend and was in a bit of a bad place mentally. I spent a lot of time alone and in my own head, and this seems to be when the problem started. I was at my workplace at the time, using the urinal, and for some reason I just felt like someone was watching me, like a burning stare. I quickly glanced over my shoulder, and in the gap between the cubicle, I could have swore that I saw for a brief moment something there. It appeared to be some sort of, disheveled woman. But just as quickly as I saw it, it disappeared. I chalked this up to sleep deprivation, didn't really think anything of it, so I just cleaned myself up and I got back to work. And boy do I wish that this was where it ended. Throughout the next few weeks, when I was by myself, I never really felt like I was by myself. That was when I caught her too. I was sat at my computer one evening and out of the corner of my eye, I saw that same woman peering at me around the corner of the door. As much as I try to remember, I've never been able to really recall her face though. I remember dirty grey hair and somewhat pale skin, but that's basically it. I froze up. I don't know how long I sat there staring back at her, and I don't remember her leaving either. This persisted for years. I saw her at home, I saw her at work, I even saw her in public once. She was never in full view, she was always peering around a corner, like she just wanted to observe what I was doing, but peering enough that she wanted me to know that she was there. This all changed one fateful night in 2019. That night, my mother fell unwell and had to be rushed to hospital. I woke up feeling that something was just wrong. I couldn't put my finger on what was up, but suddenly I hear from the hall my mother's door burst open and she's calling to me. She's passed out on the floor, semi-conscious and breathing heavily. After helping her up, I called an ambulance for her and sat with her. She asked me not to leave her as she felt in danger. I didn't leave her side until the paramedics arrived. Eventually they came, agreed that my mother needed to go to the hospital, and I said that I would follow them in my car. I ran back upstairs to get changed, as I had just thrown on some comfy clothes. And that was when I saw her. I rounded the corner of my bedroom, and in full view, on the other side of the room was this thing. It was standing in full view. I still cannot really recall its face, just the grey hair and pale skin. But I have never felt such dread. I kept my eyes locked on it as I grabbed my clothes from my floor, I was wearing the previous day, and just backed out of the room while keeping my gaze locked on it. I was half expecting something like out of a horror movie, for it to just start sprinting at me with its arms outstretched. But nothing. It just stood there, still where it was. Even when I was walking downstairs from where my room was in full view, it was still stood there. When I came back home later, it was gone. But I slept downstairs for weeks after that. From that point on, I still saw it peering around the corner a lot, but never in full view like before. I eventually moved out in 2021. Since then, I've had no more experiences with either that thing peering around the corner or anything else. I do have nightmares about it occasionally, which is probably understandable, right? But really, there's been nothing else, which I'm very grateful for. Some brief background before I begin. So, we moved into our place about 2 months ago with my fiancé. I never noticed anything weird, but my fiancé did. Now it's escalating, and honestly, I feel bad about dismissing his concerns. Also, we cannot afford to move. It started with his contact lens container. He has one that vibrates to move the lenses and the liquid around to clean them. I don't have contacts, so I may be wrong there or whatever, but either way, it vibrates for some reason. Anyway, he comes to me and says, "I think that this place is haunted." I ask him why he says that, and he says that something has been messing with his contact lenses stuff. He says that when he went to the bathroom that night, the case began to vibrate by itself on the ledge. Also, the bottle of cleaner wasn't where he left it. I tell him that it probably malfunctioned, or he hadn't properly switched it off or whatever, so him closing the bathroom door jangled the shelf enough to turn it back on. I didn't dwell too much on it, and he didn't bring it up again. Now, I have an iPhone, and so I have to manually put my phone on and off silent mode. I never put my phone on silent, as there are calls that I can't miss. I'm also the only relative that lives near to my elderly parents, and if there's an emergency, I need to know about it ASAP. Point being, my phone is never ever on silent. But twice now, in the span of a single week, it's been put on silent mode overnight, and I've missed calls the next day because of it. Neither times, though, was it done by me. I asked my fiancé if he had done it, and he said no, but he knows the situation and he just wouldn't do that. Anyway, fast forward to last night. My fiancé is sick and he's tossing and turning in bed. I stay awake mostly to keep an eye on him, and also because he's moving around too much for me to sleep. I kept the TV on with the brightness down, but it's enough for me to see the room in. And at some point, I close my eyes for a while, but then I'm sort of jolted awake. But above my bed, I see a thing coming from the ceiling. Not an entire entity, but sort of a large, darkly colored hand with more than 5 fingers on it. I wasn't in a position to count them, but there were definitely more than 5. Upon looking at it, the hand thing disappears back into the ceiling in a weird fading kind of way. I rolled out of bed, switched my lamp on, and I haven't gone back to sleep since. Mostly I've just been sitting in bed with a cup of tea to keep an eye on my fiancé while he sleeps. There's some weird stuff going on in this house, and I really don't know what to do about it. Also, I should probably mention that we regularly hear things walking on the roof at night. I always put it down to it just being an animal, while my fiancé always felt differently about it. Now I'm really not so sure anymore. This was 2004, and Mars was brightly visible in the sky. I was 14, and I had a habit of talking with the neighbor kid to the left of me through our windows, doing shenanigans like pointing a laser at the TV of our neighbors across or just stargazing alone. This was one of those nights, a night where I was stargazing alone. I sat perched on my bed with my elbows on the windowsill, and the window pane slid fully open while creating an opening using my body between the vertical shades. I was looking at the constellations to try and spot Mars. It was nearing summer. It took me a while to notice, but then I saw something strange in my neighbor's yard to the right. Mind you, I had watched the neighborhood in darkness many times and was completely familiar with my surroundings. This yard, though, was at the corner with the right side of the garden connecting to the wall of another 3-story house, so it had a lot of shade and it was pretty dark. Each garden in our neighborhood was fenced off for privacy and security. I would say each garden was about 300 to 320 square feet. But in the middle of this backyard, I saw eyes stare at me. It took me a while to process what I was looking at. There were 3 eyes, set in a triangle shape that gleamed like a cat's eyes. When I had fully accepted that this did not belong there usually, I suddenly felt fear wash over me because I couldn't comprehend what I was looking at, and it was staring right back at me. I dropped myself into my bed, my heart racing, but I wanted to verify if I really saw something odd. So I quickly shot back up, pushed the shades aside, and looked. I caught it too, mid-move, and while it moved, it was now half behind the fence that separated my backyard with the neighbors. While it moved, it turned back to face me and stood still. This all happened in like 3 to 4 seconds. Because it was now half behind the fence, only the top and right eye were facing me, still shimmering and reflecting like a cat's eye. I was very freaked out though, that it relocated itself closer to me and I had caught it mid-movement. Because of the position next to the fence, I could also deduce that, whatever it was really tall. Not as high as the fence, which would have been around 6 to 6'3", but close to it. It was then that I really freaked out inside and dropped myself back on my bed again. A few seconds ticked, but I felt so afraid of it crawling into my window that I just slammed it shut in one go. A few moments passed and then I heard the eeriest sound from the garden. A very high-pitched sort of buzzing sound, twice in a row, like nothing I'd ever heard before, so it's hard to describe, but sort of like an unbroken, trembling, high-pitched bleep that repeated itself twice. And after that, silence. I have spent years confused by what I really saw, and I checked this garden multiple times a day and night to find plausible, rational explanations as to what may have occurred. When I tell this story to people that I know and take an interest in paranormal stuff and the like, they always tell me that it's an incredibly detailed encounter and encourage me to share it with people with more know-how, I guess. So I guess that this is my attempt to entertain and perhaps receive an explanation, or at least confirmation that someone else shares a similar story to this. Because, like I said, I don't know what to think. So, I'm a skeptic. I don't really believe in paranormal stuff, but I would still probably refuse to be alone in a haunted place, and I get uneasy around ghost stuff. There was also something peculiar that happened when I was a child that I remember vividly, but I have no real rationale for, and I'd like to get some ideas as to what it was or could have been. Maybe get some takes from the more paranormal-aligned folk here, too, as to what specifically it could have been. So, I grew up in a council estate in northwest England, quite a poor area, and I believe it was built upon a small Italian POW camp some years after World War II actually ended. I'm not sure about that, but there's some local stories about haunted pubs and such, and my mum would always be watching paranormal TV shows like Most Haunted, so any notion of Occam's razor was firmly out the window, and I would quickly assume something was a ghost, etc. There were many stories of a black shadow moving through the terrace we lived in as I was growing up, and this was a common story shared between neighbors, but this could easily just have been a lie. But to get to the main story, I was probably around maybe 11 or 12 years old when this happened. I'm 25 now. My parents and my younger sister, they had left for a school performance and I'd stayed at home. I assumed I was home alone until I heard some noise downstairs. I go and check it out, and there's nobody there. I assumed it was my older sister, who could have been home. Turns out, though, that she was at a party, and then I heard footsteps upstairs. I step outside into the front garden to check my parents' bedroom window, and their bedroom light was turned on miraculously. I was certain, though, that it was turned off before, as I turned it off myself after they left. I was sure my sister was at home, so I go back inside, lock the door, and I go check upstairs. I check upstairs and there's nobody there. nobody hiding anywhere either. I turn the light back off, and then I hear a loud crash in the kitchen downstairs, so I run down to see what was happening, and I see a plate on the ground smashed along with every single cupboard door flung wide open. The cupboard where the plates were was on the left-hand side, raised above the counter, and I think it was only a single plate broken, but I was that terrified that I didn't dare stick around to find out. I opted to run next door to sit with them until my parents got home, maybe like an hour or so later, and they didn't really much believe me, and that was really disappointing. It was definitely only me in the house at the time though, and I just can't think of what it could be. There were a few more unexplained things that happened in that house. We also lived in the house 2 doors down too, which had even more unexplained stories according to my mum. But there were things like black shadow figures, lights turning on and off, and very rarely on occasion, things seeming to move. But this was by far the strangest incident that had ever happened to me. So, what could it have been from a paranormal standpoint? I'm not sure if I will believe it, but I'm definitely interested to learn more and potentially uncover some explanation about what it could have been. Always best to keep an open mind with these things, is what I say. I want to tell this story to warn others. So, I, an 18-year-old female, live in Maryland, USA. I work at a very popular burger restaurant. I work at the payment window, which is where I stand all night. I'm very friendly. I know sometimes a smile and a compliment can really make somebody's day a little better. Just this same night before the creeper came, I had a customer tell me that I was really happy and she loved me for it. That gave me the courage and the energy to survive the next interaction. Now, I'm used to the awkward comments and stares from old men. I'm sure it's my friendliness that attracts them. Our uniforms are not revealing by any means. They think I'm naive. Maybe I am. A lot more than I thought, at least. I'm fully aware of the dangers of trafficking and all that, but even this took me by surprise. This particular old man came through just before 6. He pretended to not hear his order, then laughed like it was a joke between 2 friends. Again, this is not uncommon. It's a bit of an old man thing, I think. No red flags yet. I tell him his total, and he hands me all but the change. When he does this, he waves the money around, making me chase it sort of. I was able to snatch the cash, but again, it was just an old man thing. I'm not concerned yet. He stared at the company name on my shirt and asked if this was my name. I don't wear a name tag for this reason. I joked that I was going to change my name permanently to that. He perked up, and at this point, I should state that he was white, mid-60s to 70s, driving a small white SUV with a kayak on top. He had some scruff on his face and was also holding a phone to his ear this entire time. When I finally began to engage with him, he moved the phone to be facing me. Looking back, I believe that he was probably recording me, actually. At no point did he actually speak into the phone or acknowledge it in any way, but he probed with more pressing questions. Here's the thing too, I have the same last name as someone from US history. Most old people like talking about that stuff, so I told him my last name. He didn't reflect or laugh, and he just accepted, continued asking questions. That was when I started to get this sinking feeling. He still owed me change, I told him. He grabbed another $1 and handed it to me, but he wouldn't let go. He wanted to know my first name, and I dodged answering because I was getting creeped out. He wouldn't let go of the money, though, and was practically drooling for more data about me. I gave him a name that I don't use, and he smiled, finally letting go. I got his change and told him to have a nice day. I then immediately left the window and told one of my coworkers about the weird experience. Soon, though, he returned, just 2 hours later. I didn't recognize his car on the cameras until he got to my window. I hadn't thought too much about our interaction and was busy texting my dad about whether or not a chicken sandwich was a burger, I think. My stomach dropped, though, when I saw his face. I have many regulars, all of whom I would have been happy to see. I really hoped that he doesn't become one, because I'd have to call the police, I think. He smiled and said, "Hey, the one with the last name." I sort of half smiled back and wished for the days when we all wore masks again. I tell him his total and he makes me chase the money again. For the entire time he had his phone against his ear facing me though. He starts asking me even more intimate questions. I lie or dodge them the best that I can, giving him 0 correct answers, wanting our interaction to be as short as possible. Some of the actions he asked me were, how often do you work? What time do you leave? How old are you? For that one, I knew that he wouldn't leave without a number, and I had a really nasty feeling that the younger wouldn't be the better. So I said probably 20s. He joked about me being legal. I made a face and I tried to get his change even quicker. He asked if I had a boyfriend. I was getting more and more nervous now, so my answers started getting more sarcastic. I told him boys were trouble. He specifically talked about himself and said that he'd treat me right. I handed him his receipt and told him to have a great night. He threw his hands in the air and was saying, "Don't be like that, I'll treat you right." I shut my window and said bye. He made a bit more of a fuss, but eventually drove forward. From his question about when I got off work, I believed that he was probably watching the restaurant too. I was sort of shaking by this time, so I called my mum. She immediately drove up and I talked to my manager. I was a little unsure of the car's color, so he checked the camera for me. Shout out to my manager, by the way. He really is the best. I continued at my window watching for the old guy, but I didn't see him again. I left an hour early and gave my manager specific instructions to not place a girl at my window, and he agreed. These interactions are unfortunately what cause formerly happy and cheerful service workers to become sour and quiet. And because of this, I think that I'll be taking a couple of days off. I had already had another job lined up, and to be honest, I'm sort of excited to start now. But just so people aren't confused, I guess I would like to elaborate that the phone, he held it facing me for the extent of both of our interactions, roughly 5 to 8 minutes, and he wouldn't leave, never moving or lowering it. I have 2 guesses. He was recording me and could be preparing to use that video or send it to someone, or he was on a call with somebody who was listening, who I couldn't identify. Trafficking was not my first thought by any means. I'm more concerned about how easy I would be to kidnap at night on a dark suburban road. And yes, after kidnapping, any number of things could happen to me. Just because I have a job and people assume my father lives in the state doesn't mean that I shouldn't feel threatened. That's the reason that I left so quickly too by car with a trusted adult who picked me up in the end. And again, the reason why I'm sharing this is to warn others in my area. There was definitely something fishy about this guy. That much is clear. So, first off, I just want to say that this isn't my story, but it was told to me by a lady that I've known for well over a decade now. She's never mentioned it before and only brought it up because somehow our conversation led to ghosts and somehow we got onto the topic. She isn't someone, though, who would make this stuff up, so I tend to believe her. So this happened about 10 years ago. She was married to this guy, now divorced, and they moved into a house her father owned. At first it was little things too, like lights being on in rooms when she knew that she'd turn them off. Things would go missing and turn up in weird places. Her husband at the time worked night shift and she'd be alone with her dogs. She told me that she just never quite felt comfortable in the house, especially alone. Her dogs too would stare into the hallway and seemingly growl at nothing. They would go to the top of the basement stairs and bark, then take off running as if being chased, then run back to the stairs and start barking again. This would go on for hours and the dogs would finally settle down eventually, but it would take some time. But one night, as she slept on the couch, she apparently woke up to screams coming from the basement. She said that it sounded as if someone was being murdered down there. The dogs were going absolutely berserk. She left the house and called her husband, who told her to call the police. The police came and they found nothing. She said that this would happen at least once or twice a week after that too. One night, as they were sleeping, she woke up but was paralyzed. She said that she was trying to grab her husband but couldn't move. She said that she could see something in the room. It was black and white and twirling or waving. She said that it looked like curtains almost, but couldn't see it very well. She eventually was able to move and got up to get some water. She went back to bed and she drifted off to sleep. The next morning, when her husband woke, she told him about her experience. He told her the exact same thing had happened to him, only while he was paralyzed. He saw a floating horse's head in the doorway that looked like it was chewing on its tongue. After getting out of bed, she went into the living room where she had a fish tank. She told him the kind of fish that she had, but I can't remember it. It was like one of those fish that cling to the side of the tank or whatever, but a really big one, like a foot long at least. In any case, she looked at the tank and saw that her fish had been torn into pieces. There were no other fish in the tank, though. Her sister had lived in the same house before her, so she called her sister and asked if anything weird happened at the house when she lived there. The sister said, not until after I started playing with a Ouija board. And, well, that explained a lot. The sister had experienced strange things in the house, but not to the extent that my friend had. They decided to call a preacher that they knew and have him come over to bless the house. The preacher came over and they explained to him what was going on. He proceeded to walk from room to room, praying and rebuking any evil from the house. She said that they had landline phones at that time, and the minute that the preacher started praying, all the phones in the house started ringing and just would not stop. The preacher left and they left immediately after. Her husband had a clock radio with a CD player on it. He had the alarm set to play a CD when it went off. After they came back home, the alarm on the radio came on and the CD was playing while skipping. The verse from the song on the CD was repeating, "Let this be a warning," just over and over again. During all of this, she and her husband were constantly fighting too, arguing every day, and they just couldn't stand each other. Her husband started drinking heavily and not coming home most often, which obviously meant that she was alone in the house a lot. One morning, her husband was home and sleeping. She said that she went into the bedroom and was looking at him laying in bed. She was contemplating leaving him at the time and wondering if all the events in the house were somehow connected to him. She turned to leave the room and said that she glanced back at the bedroom while walking down the hall. She said that just for a second or so, she saw this creature. It was black and red, and she said that it looked like it had a beak on its face. She said that it had 4 arms and was clawing at the door frame like it was coming after her. She turned to run away, looked back, and when she did, it was gone. She left that day, called her sister and asked if she could come and stay with her. We've worked together for, well over 10 years now, I think, and she had never told me about any of this before. The whole time she was telling me this, she kept getting goosebumps too. She said that she doesn't really like telling others about it because every time she does, something weird will happen within a few days, like feeling someone touch or nudge her when nobody's around or stuff like that. Like I said earlier too, she is just not one to embellish stories or to tell outrageous tales that are hard to believe. She left work that night and then messaged me later. She got home and Googled sleep paralysis. The Wikipedia page has a picture of a woman in bed with what looks like a monkey on her chest and a horse's head at the foot of the bed. And man, did she freak out over that. She said that she'd let me know if anything weird happens in the next few days, but honestly, he is hoping that that won't happen to her. So I'm currently traveling SEA with my two brothers. We just arrived in Saigon this morning. In the evening after dinner and a few beers, me and my two brothers, older and younger, I'm the middle brother, decided to sit on a bench in Haldane Park. We decided to have a quick smoke. We were chatting away, sat on the bench, when I noticed a Vietnamese man repeatedly sort of looking at us and also walking in circles very near where we were sitting. At first, I wasn't too concerned about him. However, my spidey senses were just sort of tingling, I guess. Then, a minute or two later, I noticed another Vietnamese man dressed as a grab delivery driver, acting suspicious, I guess, and repeatedly looking at me and my brothers. The Stalkers were both on the phone, and I believe that they were communicating with each other. Being in a foreign country, my youngest brother told us to leave. However, it was a good 600-meter walk back to the park exit. As we were walking, I noticed both Vietnamese men had got on their mopeds and were following us through the park, stopping behind trees and watching us, which was obviously very suspicious. They then overtook us and sat on a bench further down the path, waiting for us to cross their path. Being aware of this, we left the path and started walking on the grass as the crow flies to the nearest exit. We tried to avoid the men as best as we could. We were maybe 100 meters from the exit when my younger brother looks behind us to see one of the men sprinting towards us. My younger bro took a fighting stance, standing his ground, and asked the man what he wanted. The man's posture became very small and he began talking very quietly. Both me and my younger brother kept a good distance and told him to leave us alone as we walked backwards towards the exit, noticing the second assailant also approaching us, wearing motorcycle gear. However, my oldest brother decided instead of trying to get out of the situation, he got closer to the whispering Vietnamese man to hear what he was saying. Both me and my younger brother were yelling at him to get out of there, but he's an idiot. It took the Vietnamese guy 5 seconds to win my bro's trust. Then, out of nowhere, when my older bro was leaning in very close to trying to hear the man, the Vietnamese guy grabbed my brother's crotch, and he was shocked, obviously. I was ready to fight this guy, expecting to be robbed or something. But thankfully, my brother managed to get loose somehow, and after that, we started shouting and the man fled. For context, both me and my younger brother are competing MMA fighters. However, the whole situation was just really unexpected, and we didn't engage in any violence, obviously, towards these guys, just shouted at them. But the whole thing was just really wild. I guess the moral of the story is be careful in parks at night in Vietnam, because dong grabbers apparently like to moped there. My whole life has been filled with crazy, otherworldly experiences, but the most vivid ones that I think of, they are the ones from my childhood home. I lived in a very rural area up in the mountains. It would take us 45 minutes to an hour to get into the city, driving up and down windy, dangerous roads. Back in the early 2000s, my parents and I lived in a neighborhood that was heavily involved in witchcraft, Satanism, etc. We didn't actually discover this until we had moved away, but it all made a lot of sense afterwards. We lived in this house for 5 years. So our house was 2 stories. We had a basement, which was our family room, that also had a separate office room. We detached the door to this room so that it would be permanently open. Directly facing the couch we would sit on to watch TV together as a family often. Adjacent to the office, we had an electric piano right against the wall, so the office entrance would be on our right if we were sitting there. To go upstairs, you'd have to directly pass the office and face the door that goes into our garage. This info is all pretty important later, so bear with me. Now, the first year was fine, but gradually, the events became much more malicious and sinister, to the point that we really couldn't take it anymore. We were likely the only Christian family in our neighborhood, and I believe others quickly caught on because we didn't celebrate Halloween and we didn't participate in giving out candy to the neighborhood kids or anything. This seemed to anger our community, even though we were kind to others and kept to ourselves for the most part. Our house was egged and We became a target of seemingly harmless pranks and house vandalism too. And it was then that all of the paranormal events started happening after my black cat disappeared right before Halloween. We were coming home from church one night, and it was close to midnight. We pulled into our neighborhood, and sitting on the sidewalk corner all by himself was a little boy in a green shirt. My parents were slightly unsettled because, well, it's unsafe and unusual for a child to be out this late at night. They considered talking to this boy, but when we drove by him, he looked up and my parents saw that he had no face. A completely blank slate where his face should have been. Needless to say, they booked it home, and my parents didn't tell me at the time because I was about 5 or 6, to spare me from nightmares, I guess. But some years later, they told me that this is what happened, and it was really weird. But then things started happening around the house too. My mum and I used to take piano lessons, so one day while my dad was cooking lunch, my mum was in the basement practicing on the electric piano. I was in my parents' bedroom watching Stanley, a children's cartoon that was really popular back then, and while my mum was practicing piano, a child's hand popped out of the office room and mimicked a child's voice, telling my mum to come and play. She thought that it was me and told me to cut it out. The voice coerced her again to play, and my mum became irritated that I was distracting her from practicing, so she stomped into the office to find that there was no one there. I will never forget just how pale she was when I heard her scream my name and run up the stairs. I remember her asking my dad where I was, and since I heard her, I ran to her, asking what she needed me for. She asked me if I was messing with her, and I told her that I had no idea what she was talking about. My dad chimed in and said that I was in the bedroom the whole time, too. She concluded that it must have been her imagination in the end, apologized to us, and went back downstairs. But not even 10 minutes later, she runs back up the stairs panicking, saying that the child's hand appeared again in the office talking to her, and now she knew for a fact that there's no way that it could have been me. She was freaked out for the rest of the day for sure. Another instance was when we were watching The Ring in the basement at night. I know, right? Probably not the best choice, but around the time of the first jump scare of the movie, when they open the closet and see the disfigured girl, my dog starts barking like crazy at the same office entrance. He would charge at it and then sort of back away, as if something was trying to force its way closer to us. All of a sudden, though, it became really cold, and I started crying because I felt scared and uncomfortable at my dog's strange behavior. My dad turned on the light in the office, but nothing was there. My dog was going nuts and chasing something that we clearly couldn't see, and at that, we decided to call it a night and go upstairs to bed. My dog had a big crate in the garage that he would sleep in, so my dad put him there before he went to bed. It was at this point, though, that we called a minister from our church to come and pray for us. He prayed for our protection, but things just got so much worse after that. A few nights later, we all woke up to screaming coming from the garage. It sounded like a little girl being brutally murdered, screaming so loud that it pierced our ears. My dog was also barking like crazy, so we knew that we had to do something. My mum and I hid behind a dresser, and my dad hesitantly took a long decorative bamboo stick as his weapon to go to the garage and see what was going on. He said that he was shaking going downstairs, and the screaming got louder and more violent right up until his hand touched the doorknob. As soon as he did, there was complete silence. It was eerie though, and too quiet. The only thing making noise was my dog whimpering and barking, so my dad got him as quickly as possible and noped right back up the stairs. We started sleeping in the same room after that. Once we settled back down, my mum and I fell asleep first, but my dad was apparently wide awake for some time. He said that he could hear something pressing buttons on the TV remote on his bedside table. He didn't dare look, but shut his eyes and pretended to go to sleep until eventually he did. Another day, my mum was at work and dad was outside mowing the lawn. being an only child, not interested in AOL dial-up internet yet, I had to find ways to entertain myself. I was spinning in circles until I made myself dizzy. But mid-spin, I saw a man standing in the hallway with a gun pointed right at me. I was really startled, but I was so dizzy that I fell over, scared half to death. I screamed for my dad and ran sloppily to the front door. I didn't want to look back to see if he was still there. My dad was worried sick for me in my panicked state, but, what could he do? What could any of us have done? Eventually, Dad put the house up for sale and sold it to the first buyer, I think. We were out of there so quickly that it wasn't even funny. But these events, they honestly traumatized me, and I'm extremely hypersensitive to spiritual energy, I guess you could call it, evil stuff. Horror movies, they don't really scare me at all compared to the real fear and panic that you feel in moments like this if you've ever experienced them. Anyway, if you've listened for this long, then thank you very much. I do hope that you guys enjoyed hearing my experiences, and it feels good to get it off my chest. Look, I know that this is kind of a lot all in one night, but this is exactly as it happened. And if you have any insight, well, it's definitely welcome. I still don't understand how it all could be connected, but this past week, my friends and I rented a cabin in Hatch, Utah, at the base of some mountains. We were so high up that the house didn't have AC, so we opened all the windows. This matters for later. We were surrounded by beautiful tall grass, awesome views. It was just perfect. We went out at night to stargaze, and that's when things started to get a bit weird. My husband and I were out by ourselves after our friends went in when we saw a ton of what we thought were satellites out of nowhere. They formed into a sort of triangle shape, and suddenly the night sky that was inside the triangle started to move with the lights very slowly, almost like something was using a cloaking device to hide what it was. We both thought UFO instantly and couldn't believe what we were seeing. As soon as it appeared, it zipped off and we didn't see anything else again, but noticed that all the sound had stopped. What I mean is that there was no sound from bugs, bats, or anything, except there were tons of shooting stars and a few what looked like meteors as soon as it was gone. We both went inside to tell our friends because we felt a bit uneasy because of this. I do wish that was it, but about an hour later, we were in our room getting ready for bed when we heard a high-pitched whistle outside. We both sort of laughed at this and joked about skinwalkers and wendigos. I don't really believe in that stuff, so again, we laughed it off and we got into bed. But not even 10 minutes later, we heard heavy footsteps on the deck outside of the room and heavy breathing. I was honestly paralyzed with fear for about 15 seconds while we listened to it stomp heavily with a guttural deep breath. I then jumped up and hit the lights outside on the deck and threw open the blinds, yelling, assuming that it was a bear, but when I did, there was nothing there. It had rained heavily that day though, and there were no prints on the deck either, or dirt or mud around the house or anything. Now, I 100% believe in aliens, but I just cannot explain that second encounter. Has anyone else experienced anything like this? Do I need to worry about being followed? Our friends experienced none of this, and I'm honestly just stumped. I felt so uneasy the rest of that first night that I didn't sleep, but after that, nothing else happened for the next 3 nights that we were there, and I felt totally at ease. So I guess my question is, what did I experience? When I was a teenager, I grew up in a small town called Bark Burnett, Texas. It's a country town on the Red River bordering Oklahoma. My house was located on the outskirts of town, and behind our fence was a giant field where cattle would graze, so it wasn't strange to hear them moo throughout the day and night. Me and my siblings were no strangers to this field, We would play out there and even camp out there every once in a while to get away from our parents. One day, while my siblings and I were playing basketball outside in the driveway, we started hearing what sounded like a cow giving birth in the distance. It was screaming as if it was in pain, so us being the country kids that we were, decided to jump the barbed wire fence and witness the birth firsthand. As we made our way, we could tell that we were getting closer by the sound of the cries getting louder when, all of a sudden, the cries just stopped. It went dead silent. Well, we continued to walk in the direction that we last heard the cow when we noticed something about 50 yards away in a clearing. We decided to see what it was, so we all approached it. And to our surprise, we happened to stumble upon 3 of the cow's legs. They looked as if they had been ripped from the cow while it was still alive and strategically placed in a triangle. There was a massive amount of blood around it, the triangle, but there was no cow anywhere. It's been 25 years and I still think about this. I mean, where the heck did that cow go? We didn't hear any trucks or see any tire marks near the legs or anything. In fact, there were no prints anywhere. The whole thing is just a real head-scratcher. My girlfriend and I live in a small town in New Jersey, right by the Delaware River. We have many trails around here in the woods, and the one that we went to last night is in a small state park right by the river. We had gone to this spot once before during winter, and all of the vegetation was gone this first time. The trail was quite clear and had only a very thin strip of wood separating the road from the riverbank. However, this second time, it was different. Now that it was summer, there was thick brush everywhere in that spot. We parked the car around 6:30 p.m. in a small space right out of the road where all the trail lights start. It was clearly visible is what I'm getting at, beckoning us in despite the thick brush. Thinking back, it was almost unnatural too how beaten down the narrow slice of trail was, in contrast to the thick brush surrounding it. In any case, we start on the trail and easily make it to our spot by the river in 6 minutes. There was one area where the trail led us to a small ditch filled with plant life, but both ends of the trail were clearly visible from this area. After passing through, we passed a big tree with thick roots coming out from the ground and made it to our spot by the river. When we got to our spot, we saw that the river was quite high, but we found a spot to sit down. We sat for about an hour talking about the tragic fire that recently happened in Hawaii. At around 7:30, we figured that it would be a good idea to head back before it got dark. When we passed the big tree right at the start of the trail and got down in the ditch, something felt off immediately though. I couldn't tell you exactly what it was, but I felt terrified of the vegetation. It was so thick and suffocating that I could barely breathe. Standing in this ditch, the two of us tried to come back on the same trail that we came through, but when we went in that direction, we noticed that the brush had completely swallowed it up. It wasn't even dark at this point, it was just gone. We looked everywhere in that ditch for our trail. We even brute forced our way into the direction of the trail, but we never found a trace of it. No narrow slice of clear ground, everywhere was covered in green. We wandered for about half an hour, coming upon a second smaller tree with its roots above the ground. And here we saw what looked like part of the trail that we were on, but the entire path was completely blocked by stinging nettles, which we hadn't seen any of on our way in. Mind you, this tree was definitely a landmark that we remembered from our first time coming here. We even have a video of it at that time. We searched and searched, and like I said, this was not a very large trail by any means. We should have stumbled upon it. We were scared of the coyote packs and bears that call these woods home. My girlfriend was panicking, and I was not much better, if I'm being honest. At this point, it was completely dark, and we only had our phone flashlights. We ended up having to brute force our way through the brush to the road, and it took far longer than it should have. It felt like we were running for hours, in fact. We weren't walking too, we were running at this point, and it took us almost an hour to get back to our car at around 8:50 p.m. But again, it was only a 6-minute walk on the windy trail, but when we were running almost perfectly straight towards the road, it took us almost 10 times that. We also ended up farther down the road in the opposite direction of the trail, which honestly should have been impossible, because my girlfriend had her Maps app up, tracking our distance to the road, and we were going straight towards it. When we finally got back to the car, we noticed the trail was totally blocked now. No trace of the spot where we entered, the plants completely undisturbed, like we were never there. And that is honestly one of the scariest parts of this whole experience. We were obviously so relieved, but on the way back home, my girlfriend brought up something from the first time that I had forgotten about. You see, she had found a tattered rope on the ground, right off to the side of the trail under a tree. It was unmistakably and tragically a noose. It had been cut cleanly on the end that would be tied to the tree. It was very dirty and had clearly been exposed to the elements for some time. Not wanting anyone walking the trail to have to see that, she kicked it to the river. Her heart was in the right place, but seemingly a foolish mistake in hindsight. Now, unlike my girlfriend, I'm not a very spiritual person, but when she said that, both of our bodies shuddered, and I felt, momentarily, that same anxiety and dread that I felt in the woods. I knew how lonely whoever tied that noose had to be. I feel almost completely certain that they were behind the events of that night, that they wanted us to stay and keep them company, though I don't think that they meant us harm. Tonight we went back to the trail because my girlfriend wanted to perform a ritual for this spirit. She wanted to make right with it and bring it peace for the night. She set up a handful of witchy-type items and spoke a few words to the spirit. She brought flowers, placing them on the posts marking the still fully blocked entrance, and lit a black candle, adorning the post with a little bit of melted wax. She said a few words and explained how we meant no harm, apologizing for kicking the rope in the river. But as she poured this wax, I saw something that, honestly, I still doubt, but I feel like it's worth mentioning. Below the arching plants to the immediate left of the first post, I saw an amorphous blob of some kind. It did not seem like a trick of the light, as it was dark. We only had one small lantern and the candle illuminating the area. And weirdly, it seemed to reach out to her, not in a violent or negative way, but in a longing and desperate manner. Still, I was terrified something would grab and take her deeper into the brush. She was incredibly calm though, and upon pouring the wax and stepping away, the presence, or whatever it was, disappeared. We sat down in front of the posts and kept the candles lit. It was the calmest candle that I'd ever seen. The flames slowly drifted, unflickering, back and forth between my girlfriend and I, as if looking at us and checking us out. As we waited longer, the candle would grow calmer. Finally, as the stick of incense that we were burning began to reach its end, the candle flame began to drift slowly away from us and pointed towards the woods. "Hey, are you ready to go home yet?" I asked. The candle flame then began to flicker slightly, swinging side to side, then setting calmly centered, as if to say, "Okay, I'm ready." When the incense finished burning, we blew out the candle and got back in our car. We then tossed our last couple of flowers into the river at the dock upstream so that they would make it to the trail. We both felt tired and relaxed after this whole experience, and my girlfriend says that we made peace with the spirit or whatever. We do want to go back someday, only during the day and only in fall and winter when the brush has cleared and we can't become trapped by it. But I'm hoping that we can keep it company. We visited this place on August 14th of 2023, just a couple of days ago. Feel free to believe or disbelieve as you wish, but quite honestly, I would love to get your thoughts in the comments as to what you think that this was all about. This event happened to me and a friend from out of town that I had invited to go hunting one afternoon. This location was in South Louisiana, in an area thick with woods and a lot of palmetto, up to 6 foot in height, in some places, and the water that we had to walk into to get to my deer stands were at least up to our waist at times, so it was slow moving in the mile that we had to walk to our deer stands, and my friend wasn't used to this tough terrain, but he kept up, and when I got to the first stand, which was about 15 feet off of the ground, with a ladder to climb up, once he was up, I told him that I would be by to pick him up in about half an hour after dark, since I was about a half mile past him. It was a full moon that was reflecting off of the water, allowing us to hunt a few minutes longer, and when it became too dark to see, I climbed down from my deer stand with my rifle on my shoulder, and I started walking slowly towards my friend to pick him up. And when I was almost to his stand, I shine my light up, and he just wasn't in the stand. So I shine my light on the ground at the bottom of the stand, and there he was, leaning back against the tree that the stand was on. And what was odd was that he wouldn't look my way, even after me calling his name. So I walked up to him within a couple of feet and asked if he was ready to go, and that's when he finally turned his head and looked towards me, and what I saw in his face scared me so bad that I took my rifle off of my shoulder, putting it between me and him. His eyes were rolled back in his head, and his mouth was wide open, just standing there looking at me, not saying a word, and he wasn't answering me either. I was asking him what the heck he was doing and what was wrong, but he wouldn't answer me. So there I was, a mile or so back in the woods with solid palmettos all around us and up to my waist in water, with my good friend looking at me as if he was possessed or something. And yes, at this point, I was scared. So eventually I finally slapped him in the face, and he seemed to snap back to himself. I then asked if he was okay, and his only words to me were, "Let's get out of here now." So, with me not knowing what the heck was going on, I made him walk in front of me the whole way back to the truck, and we get on in and we left without saying a word. Eventually I asked him what happened in the woods. Why did he look so shocked or possessed like that? He started crying, and then he started telling me about how apparently he was sitting there in the stand when he heard something coming through the water, moving palmettos as if it was walking. And when it got close enough to see what it was, he said that it was a man that apparently looked like he had been skinned alive, like he had no skin at all on him. And he said that he was so scared that after this thing had passed him, he climbed down and hid under the stand against the tree so that it wouldn't see him if it came back. He was in shock, and when I got to him, that's why he had looked like he did apparently. He was so shook up and crying that eventually I had to tell him to pull over so that I could drive. Well, a week went by and I was talking to my little cousin who had gone out on tour at a near Indian memorial, and they were explaining how this Indian tribe would skin men of their tribe alive and turn them loose in the woods when they had committed a serious crime in the tribe. And my friend who had witnessed this skinned man a week earlier wasn't from around this area and had no way of knowing this, so what did he see that put him in shock like that? Was it a ghost of one of these Indians who was skinned alive years ago? I don't know, but I just know that the shape my friend was in when I got to him that night in the woods is something that I will never forget. So, myself and 3 of my friends were all sitting in my backyard on my picnic table, the top of it, so we were all facing the same way, looking up at the clear night sky one evening in the small town that we lived in. We had just left the bar and were chatting about our night and smoking a joint when, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, we saw something really big, all black, triangle in shape, with no lights whatsoever on it, appear in the night sky. It was a split second that we all saw it move from one end of the sky to the other, and it covered the stars as it did this. It was absolutely massive, easily the size of a football field. All of us just looked at each other and exclaimed at the same time, "Did you just see that?" It was honestly insane and something that I'll never forget. But then, a few weeks after the incident, I had a very vivid dream that I was on a very cold operating table with what I can only sense as beings that were not human, and they were sort of tickling me each time that they touched me, almost like a faint electrical current. But there were more than one touching me in different places all at one time. It was weird because I could feel their physical touches while asleep, like I was actually there. I wasn't able to see anything while this was going on. I'm pretty sure that I had something over my face, so I couldn't see them or anything around me. However, I didn't feel threatened or scared by them at all, which was a bit strange because, honestly, I probably should have been. The dream ended abruptly and I woke up in my bed, but it seemed so real to me that to this day, I fully believe that maybe I was abducted while asleep so that they could study me. I've not seen the black triangle in the sky since or had any more abduction dreams, thankfully, but it was definitely one of the strangest occurrences for me to date. I'm wondering, though, if anybody else here has had a similar encounter. When I was a kid, I lived in Clinton, Tennessee. Both parents worked full-time, so I was often sent over to stay with my grandparents, who had a plot of land in the vicinity of, but not right in, Mosheim near Greenville. Both of them had been in East Tennessee for their whole lives, and that area for a good many years as well. They had been established at their home for some decades before this story, and remained there a good time after. Recently, I had reason to return to that area after having spent the majority of my adult life in MN. Being in and around the area, driving the same roads made me reminiscent about my lazy summer days tucked away at my grandparents'. I had learned to shoot on the same .22 with which Grandpa had taught Mum, feeding fish at a neighbor's stocked pond, or just spotting deer and bear with binoculars from the back porch. When I relayed this to my mum, she in turn told me a story about a time that I scared my grandpa half to death, then lied about hanging out with Bigfoot. At first, I honestly had no idea what she was talking about, but then I remembered exactly what actually happened with startling clarity. There was some new context given by the experience adulthood provides, I guess. And no, this is not about Bigfoot or a cryptid. But before we start, some information about my grandparents' land. Their house was on a small hill surrounded by a grass lawn. The lawn gave way to a smallish hayfield, then the woodline. These woods lasted for a good half-mile to either side of the home, and a good several miles to the back. I hated the hayfield because it was too pokey to play in, but I liked to hang out in a sort of creek that ran behind it. To get there, I would walk to the edge of the property just in the woodline to avoid the hay, and while at my grandparents', the only rules were that I had to stay where I could see the house, so the house could see me. I was to take a whistle with me anywhere that I went as well. I didn't take the whistle, seeing it as a badge of my regrettable young age, and the best part of the creek was it was out of sight of the house. In fact, that was the only stretch where it got deeper than my knees, and thus the only part where I could swim. Naturally, I spent much of my time in that water, splashing around, skipping stones, and just being a kid. But one day I was playing in the creek when I noticed someone. It was a man, a stranger, on the bank just watching me. He had long hair, a beard, and pale skin, so dirty that it was stained. I couldn't tell his age and simply thought of him as old. I have no better guess now as well, as he clearly went through long years of hard living. He wore no shirt on, no pants, only a wrap of dirty cloth around his waist, and I thought of as a sort of Moses dress at the time, thanks to some illustrated Bible stories I heard growing up. Around his neck, there were multiple necklaces made from knotted tatters of cloth, fiber, and string. In those knots were various pieces of mostly bones, but some flowers and bits of dark glass as well, it seemed. When I first saw him there, I was terrified. I was frozen still. The man, however, was smiling. He gestured from his squat with an outstretched arm, fingers down in a kind of don't stop for me wave. I didn't react at first. I think I was just sort of startled. Then he splashed at me, still smiling. He did it again. I splashed back, and soon we were playing. We both threw water at each other. He jumped into the creek and stomped around with me, laughing all the while. He threw rocks in the water, and so did I. I pushed him, he pushed back. We carried on for some minutes until my grandma called for me. With her voice, a switch had turned off. The man also stopped in his tracks, fixed his gaze toward the house. Then, as my grandma kept on hollering, he looked at me. He crept back to his side of the creek, barely disturbing the water, and then slid into the brush, completely silent the whole time, holding my gaze. Once he was out of sight, I waded in the water until my grandma found me. She wanted to know if I was alone, and I said no. She became very tense, asking who was with me while looking around. I didn't answer because at the time I just didn't know how. Seeing no one, she pulled me back to the house without any more words, gripped like iron the whole time. At the house, the real inquisition began, and I didn't really have new words. The event and this reaction overwhelming my ability to explain, I guess. Such silence further irked my grandma, and I was swiftly placed in a corner, held without bail, awaiting patriarchal judgment. Around an hour later, my grandpa came home from work. He was told about my churlishness and was ready to set into me again when I started talking. I told him about the man, hairy and old, dressed like Moses, about how he played and then he disappeared. I remember they digested this for a few minutes before sending me to my room. I was honestly happy to go, and happier still when Grandpa didn't yell at me like he usually did when I misbehaved. Later, I was brought out for dinner. I ate in the kitchen with Grandma, but Grandpa called me to the back porch. He was on the swinging bench, looking out over the hayfield turned red by the setting sun. He had kicked off his boots and put them next to his shotgun. I knew that was odd for the gun to be out of the closet. Previously, we had used it to shoot bottles. Some I would actually throw them into the air like they're a clay pigeon or whatever. But these escapades were accompanied with speeches about how the gun was dangerous and only for adults to use. He went through my story again, his tone deadly serious now. Eventually, he asked me how hairy was the man, really. I told him very, thinking that this was the right answer. He asked where, and I told him everywhere, like a bear. He ruminated on this, and I grew more nervous, worried I was in trouble or causing trouble, just wanting the trouble, wherever it lay, to end. So when he finally asked me to swear, in the name of Christ or on my mother, that I was telling the truth about everything, I said that I had been joking. He finally yelled, and then sent me back to my room. And after that, the family memory became that I had hid by the creek and made up a tale about Bigfoot. At the time, everybody was upset with me, and I was forbidden from going back to the creek or anywhere out of sight. The enforcement of this rule, like the others, was a bit lackluster. Even so, for a time I didn't go back there. In my memory, I stayed away for a long time, but I am sure that it was only a few days, that hiatus feeling interminable to my elementary aged self. When I did start going to the creek again, I took a bucket of toys, mostly Godzilla stuff, and a thick stick plucked from the woodline on the way. I think that I was conflicted about what to do if the man came back, imagining either impressing him with my toy collection or clubbing him, or both in turn. When he did show back up, he appeared next to me as I dozed under a tree on my side of the creek. I was once again gripped with terror. He was not smiling, his face expressionless as he lurked beside me, having watched for who knows how long before I smelt him. I scrambled away, leaving my stick and toys. Coming to my feet a yard out, I stood in the sun while the man watched me from the shade. Eventually, he crouched and started to look through my bucket. I remember becoming indignant as he examined my toys, one by one, only to toss them into the dirt. It became too much at some point, and I started to lecture the man, telling him about how he got me in trouble, how he was a weirdo, how he stank. At some point, he stopped watching through my things and calmly watched my tirade, face still neutral, eyes analytical. Once I had concluded my lecture, I sat back under the tree to pout, having become hot in the sun. I remember the man made a noise, a grinding kind of snort, and when I looked over at him, he was chuckling while he inspected the last few figures in my bucket. I wanted to laugh too, but was more determined to stay sullen. Once everything was out of the bucket, he put one figure, Ghidorah, back into the bucket. He then stood to his hunched fullest, took the bucket by its handle, began to make his way back into the woods. I stayed by the tree line until he turned, said something, not a word that I knew or know, and gestured with a forward sweep of his hand. At first I didn't comply, despite knowing that he wanted me to follow. After a few moments, he yipped, clicked his teeth, and gestured again more emphatically. With this further prompt, I did get up and come along, the man making improving noises and putting on his smile again. We went into the woods. The man led, but he was naturally quicker and quieter, making it hard to keep up. Eventually, he would stop when he lost me, knocking on the trees with sticks and whistling arrhythmically so that I may find him in the vegetation. He never came back for me, though, opting instead to guide me forward with the noises at this point. And it was at this point that I became lost, having only a vague sense of my grandparents' place being behind me. After some time, maybe 15 minutes, we came to a bold. The man had me wait there, indicated by patting the ground, before going into the tree line alone. He returned from a different direction, pulling a sled. It was made from half of a discarded plastic drum and lined with small pelts and smooth bark, and on the back half, there rested the fly-covered carcass of squirrels, opossums, and other critters savaged into anonymity. On the pulling end, woven pouches were tied into place on it by the same eclectic cordage that made the man's necklaces. He put my bucket on the sled and tossed Ghidorah in a pouch. He then called me closer with a glottal noise and a beckoning wave. I saw the sled's pouches held many odds and ends: dried salamanders, mushrooms, metal bits, glass fragments. From one, the man pulled a square made from bound-together sticks, just big enough to slip over my wrist. From another, he pulled a piece of fool's gold and a small shard of geode crusted with a sort of bit of purple crystal, it looked like. These he handed to me with an air of business and made a few more utterings of nonsense. He then patted the ground again for me to sit. I did so without much bewilderment, understanding that we had traded, the same as exchanging Pokemon cards at recess. I didn't much miss Ghidorah anyway, as he was a bad guy, but the bucket was a huge loss. In retrospect, I think Ghidorah was chosen because its dull gold scales resembled something valuable. The bucket for its obvious ability to hold things, I guess, but the man came back and gestured for me to follow by slapping his thigh. I did this readily. During the hike back, I tried to keep up and pay attention. I did so moderately well, having to be whistled over a few times, but I did notice that our path was not straight. The man led me one way and then another, making turns unneeded by the lay of the land. We eventually, though, came out by the creek, but from a different approach than we had left. I could hear my grandma calling for me again, not from up on the hill, but from out in the field. The man would not cross the creek at this point, but pushed me to do so. I did, but did not go to my grandma. Instead, I crept back to the house and around to the opposite side. There I laid in the shrubs by our front door pretending to sleep, and I was found. I swore that I had been there the whole time. When I was sent back to my room, I placed my fool's gold, crystal, and charm in my bedside table for safekeeping. The next day, I went back to the creek to pick up my toys, and the man was not there. However, throughout that summer, he did visit me again to sit under the tree or throw rocks at the water or yammer softly to himself. I would bring snacks and candy to share, and he would likewise give me stringy, dried meat, which I ought not to have eaten, I know, or honeysuckle blossoms, which I still would eat, taken from my old bucket. He seldom visited long and never splashed and whooped like he did on that first meeting. And at this point, you may be wondering why I'm sharing this story. And well, there are two more occasions that I wanted to account. One absolutely gruesome and the other was awful. So the eventful one occurred near the 4th of July. I had brought 2 boxes of bang snaps to the creek. The man was initially wary of the little fireworks, but quickly came to appreciate their miniature pyrotechnics. He took the box that I gave him gratefully, even taking the empty box, likely for the wood shavings, which are excellent tinder. But during the use of the bang snaps, I had scared a turtle into the water and to the opposite bank. It sat there watching us from the far shore. The man, after stowing the bang snaps into the bucket, noticed the turtle. With little thought, he scooped up a smooth stone and threw it with force and accuracy into the turtle. He then waded over to retrieve the slider, which struggled meekly in his grasp, one leg knocked clean off. On my side of the river, he took from the bucket a new piece of stone. One side was rounded and fit into his hand. The other came to a sort of flinty cutting edge. Working with deft experience, the man began chopping the live turtle above its neck, pulling up on the shell top. The thing struggled and bled as it was bisected, the dome eventually coming free. The turtle dropped eventually to mingle everything with the dirt and the sand. The man rinsed the shell in the river, then offered it to me. In wordless horror, I just ran. That evening, I came back to shuffle the dead turtle into the flowing waters of the creek. The shell itself was nowhere to be found. This experience did not deter me from going to the creek, or the man from visiting again. However, sometimes he would try to call me away from the creek with thumps and whistles. I would tell him that I heard him and refused to move. On some occasions, he would join me, on others he would leave. The last time that we met, we were sitting under the tree sharing cowtails, and from the woods, there came some whistling and the staccato knocking of a woodpecker. The man looked up and whistled back. There were a few more such exchanges before he stood, collected his bucket, and beckoned for me to follow. I was curious and felt comfortable with the man as a guide, so I did as asked. He took me back to the bald, a direct path this time, periodically stopping to call or respond to the other in the wood. And waiting for us at the bald was a woman and a child. The woman was dressed the same as the man, topless, wrapped at the waist. She was dirty with long hair and a wiry frame. The child was in a similar state, wearing a sack that went to their knees. The man sat on the ground and the woman joined him, sitting in his lap sort of partly but leaning forward so that her elbows rested on her crossed knees. She had dark brown eyes that were fixed on me. The other child would not look up. I didn't know what to do. I didn't speak. The other kid lifted their sack to wipe at their nose, and I learned under all that dirt that it was a her. The man then made a noise and drummed on the woman's bare back. The kid looked at him, still hanging her head, hair covering her face. The woman yammered and swatted at the girl lazily, the man echoing her noises, slapping skin to skin once more. At this bizarre scene, the girl approached me, stopping close enough that I could smell her and hear her wheezing breath. She was thin but not emaciated, and slightly taller than me, should she have straightened up. The man and the woman fussed some more. Then the girl leaned close to me and pressed her cheek to mine. Her hair was in between us, greasy and cold. She made no move to embrace me, no move at all, only pressing limply against me and breathing so loud now that it was all that I could hear. During this time, the woman had approached. She pulled the girl back by her shoulder with one hand and delivered a flurry of slaps to the crown of the girl's head. The woman then gathered the girl's hair in one hand, using the other to sweep back her bangs. The girl was then made to look at me, face bare. One side of her jaw was bulged out, smooth skin over a lemon-shaped bump. Her mouth was twisted by this deformity. Her nose faced to one side as if affixed sideways and leaked a trail of clear snot. One eye was bulged and sort of roomy, the other startlingly regular. It looked at me, blank and dark brown. The woman gave the girl's head a little shake, spat off to the side, then cooed like a dove as she smiled at me. At that, I'd had enough, and I ran. There was commotion behind me. I think the girl was pushed to the ground, but I didn't look back and they didn't pursue. My flight ended at my grandparents' house, my absence unnoticed. I chose not to tell anyone what happened, wanting to just forget it, I guess, not wanting to get into trouble either, not thinking about the girl, the couple, what was intended for me. I just spent that August inside whenever I visited my grandparents. I begged not to be taken, claiming that it was boring and lonely. Sometimes when I sat on the porch or went from the car to the house, I'd catch a snippet of a bird call in the wind, or the distant tapping of wood, and I would always hurry inside. My grandma, though, could tell that something was wrong, and made an effort to entertain me in town. My grandpa cared in his own way, involving me in errands as he never had before. Eventually school started, classes and friends eased me away from the thoughts of the dirty man or the people in the clearing, and time must have done the rest. I think now that all of the people in the clearing were of a family, I guess, but their features, white skin, brown eyes, brown hair, are common enough that they all could have been unrelated, I guess. I'm sure that they lived together though. They knew each other's signs and signals. They even use their own words. I know that the Smokies are full of tales of feral people, wild men, and superstition. I also know that they are full of people living in unlikely ways in unlikely places, and that those real people call others kin, and that through the chain of human connection, even a recluse living in a rundown shack is someone somebody. I guess though that I'm asking if people in my story are somebody someone, or if they may be known, or if their behavior rings any bells, bellies, any known intention. I figured that here, where the tale would not be discounted immediately out of hand, this might be the right place to ask some people. So, if you have any thoughts about this, then I would love to hear them. And thanks for listening. I still think about this every now and then. When I was in 3rd grade, I had a friend named Rebecca. She had transferred to my school because she moved around a lot from foster home to foster home. So I didn't plan on creating a tight bond with her because I knew that she would have had to move eventually. Throughout the school year, she was my only friend though. She was somebody who truly understood me. I never felt understood until I met Rebecca, in fact. She was the first person to introduce me to the paranormal whenever I would spend the night at her house. She would always tell me scary stories in the dark as she would shine a flashlight over her face. I really didn't believe the scary story she told me until, well, this one particular night. So we had just went to dinner and a movie with her parents. When I would spend the night, we would have a bedtime, and it was 8 p.m, exactly on the dot. But Rebecca and I never followed that rule. Whenever we knew her parents went to sleep, we would go downstairs and watch some TV in the living room. So we did that one particular night. And as we sat on the couch, she started telling me that she would see this man and his dog every single night. He usually minded his own business and didn't speak. He would just wander around the house with his dog. Obviously, I was skeptical, but as the night went on, I thought to myself that Rebecca was lying to me, just trying to scare me. You know how elementary schoolers are. They often have a bad habit of lying. But as we sat there on the couch watching TV, I looked behind me, and sure enough, there was this man with his dog going up the staircase. The man had a top hat and a tuxedo on, and his dog was what looked like to be a golden retriever of sorts. Rebecca didn't have a scared look on her face like I did. I remember being so scared that I had to sleep in my mum's room for a couple of weeks after it, because the whole thing just really shook me. I never did keep in touch with Rebecca after she moved, but I hope she's doing well. My husband works at the Oregon State Hospital, a facility infamous for its past treatment of mental illness, and where the classic film One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest was shot. Despite its dark past, the facility had become a place of healing for many individuals suffering from mental illness. However, as with many older buildings, a portion of the asylum was scheduled to be demolished. As part of his cleaning duties, my husband ventured into the abandoned portion of the building, which had been devoid of any human activity for a considerable length of time by this point. As he worked, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. During his lunch break, he decided to call me to check in. I answered the phone and I could hear what sounded like people talking in the distance. However, the voices were muffled and indistinct. He sounded distracted and didn't seem to be listening to anything that I was saying. Irritated, I sort of snapped at him and asked if he was calling to talk to me or them. My husband was confused and quickly replied that he was alone in the building. My heart sank as I realized that something just wasn't right. There was a panic in his voice too that I had never heard before in our 19 years of marriage. After that experience, my husband was understandably shaken, but he continued to work at the asylum. He never had any other experiences like that again, but the memory of that day still very much creeps us out. I lived in this house for about 7 years, and I have a lot of stories, so I apologize if this is a little bit long. I've tried to structure it in a chronological sense, as best as I can anyway. But for some background info, this is in a small town in central Texas. The house is a 1-story, 3-bedroom, 2-bath, with a front and back living room, a nice-sized backyard, with a palm tree, gazebo, and a shed converted into a bar. It was right across the street from a Catholic church, cemetery, and after we moved out, we found out that the property used to be an orphanage in the 1960s, but shut down because before that, it was a funeral home with a crematorium that the orphanage was using to dispose of the bodies of the malnourished and abused children living there. Me and my immediate family, were initially hired to clean up the house after the previous tenant trashed it. By trashed, I mean absolutely trashed it too. The carpet, when we cleaned it, was a light beige color, but it started out black. There were human-sized holes in the walls as if someone was slammed repeatedly all through the house. Dead chickens and other animals were all over the floor, along with black candles, pentagrams on the walls and floor, and some mystery blood smeared on the back closet of the master bedroom as well. How did we feel comfortable enough moving in after we found all of that? Well, when it was cleaned up, it was a really nice place, and the rent was only $450 a month. We should have known just based off of the low rent, but I digress. So, the first incident. It was our first day in the house. I had most of my stuff in already, so my parents told me to wait at the new house while they went to our old house with my siblings to get some more stuff and all that. I decided to take a nap after putting a few things on my dresser. In the center of the dresser, I put a Mary candle my mum had given me. Might be important to note too that the most satanic stuff was found in the master bedroom that had a walk-in closet, a dressing room, and its own bathroom. This room became my room because everybody else was too scared to even set foot in it, including my parents. The whole 7 years that we lived there, the only time anybody else but me set foot in that room was before we moved in while we were cleaning the house. My little brother got the middle room, and my little sister got the room next to his at the end of the hall, next to the other bathroom, and my parents opted to turn the back living room into their bedroom. So after arranging my stuff on the dresser, I laid on my bed to take a nap while waiting for my family to return with more stuff. When not 2 minutes after I shut my eyes, the candle slid off the right side of the dresser to the floor with a thud. I was a little bit freaked out, but as I was by myself, I tried not to let it get to me too much, rationalizing it, saying that it was the wind or my dresser is crooked or slanted or something. I checked the dresser by pulling it away from the wall a smidge and putting a ball in the center to see if it rolled, and it didn't. Then I checked all the doors and the windows to make sure that there wasn't a drafter or anything like that. I put the candle back in the center and I laid back down. When, not even a minute or so after, I shut my eyes, the candle slid off the left side this time, like someone was sliding it and it fell. I literally said nope, and I ran outside and waited on the porch until my family got back. When they questioned why I was outside because it was summer and Texas is really hot in the summer, I replied that I wanted some fresh air and sun, trying to play it off so that they wouldn't think that I was crazy. Now, the second incident, this was after we had been living there for a few months. I was asleep in my room with the door open because it made me feel better, and the rest of my immediate family were gathered in my sister's room down the hall, telling each other ghost stories as it was close to Halloween at this point. My mum said something along the lines of, "You all better stop telling that stuff before something happens." And right after she said that, my door slammed shut with so much force that it shook the entire house. I instantly started screaming. Side note too, when I was younger, I used to sleep talk or walk a lot, especially if there was paranormal activity in the house, as this wasn't the last time that we lived in a haunted house, unfortunately. My mum urged my stepdad to go and check on me, but he just said, "You go and check on her." So eventually they both came to check on me, and they said that once they opened the door, they saw me sitting up in my bed with my eyes open but glassy and not focused on anything. And apparently I kept saying, "Get off of me, help." They were too scared to enter the room, so from the door they switched on the light and said, "Get out." At that moment, they said that a black sort of cloud seemed to lift off of me, and I fell back in the bed with my eyes closed, fast asleep. I don't remember any of that, but what I do remember is waking up and them freaking out. But they freaked out and left me there because apparently they were too scared and told me about it in the morning. I knew that they weren't lying too because the dream that I had the night before matched up with what they were saying, and they both sort of looked kind of pale when they were telling me. So they were scared and they just left me in there apparently. I'll probably end up sharing a part 2 later as there's a lot more, but any additional information needed or any questions, please do ask below as I'm happy to share more. I think that I was somewhere between 10 and 12 when this happened, but I do remember it pretty well. So I was very adventurous as a kid, still am now to be honest. I was always outside, wasn't at my house too much, especially around this time as my parents were going through a divorce and everything was about them and us children were somewhat neglected. We lived in a really nice suburban neighborhood though that had a lot of trees and curvy, hilly, windy blocks that were quite a lot of square miles, really big, maybe 100 or so, but I could be way off. Basically, we had a lot of space to explore though, is what I'm getting at. I was with my 4 friends during the summer. Middle of the day, we were walking back to go to someone's house after playing some baseball or something. 2 of us had scooters and went ahead of us a little ways, and 2 of us were walking, trailing behind. At one point, our scooter friends get to the end of the block and turn around to wait for us slowpokes just walking. And I remember getting a really strange feeling, but at the time I didn't really know up from down, so I barely recognized it. They're both looking back at us, kind of concerned, which I think triggered that feeling. But then one of them shouts, "Guys, run!" I look at my friend like, why would they want us to run right now? He says it again with more force and gave me a slight fright, "Run." So I thought, all right. We start running full speed towards them. It really wasn't that far away, maybe 100 feet, and stopped when we got to them. Why did you want us to run? Apparently, a car drove by us slower than normal with purple-tinted windows and turned around the corner and disappeared. And that car had slowed down and was pulling over, and someone had opened one of the doors, and my friend said that they could see someone there, like they were getting ready to try and grab us. I don't remember seeing that part happen, but I do remember the very eerie vibe of the car, so I'm fairly certain that they weren't lying. I thought that I remembered that same car parked in a nearby driveway at one point, like maybe they lived there and it was their lot, but I was never sure if it was that exact car or not. In any case, having good friends like this that look out for you, it may just save your life, like perhaps it did mine. I'm 19 years old and living far from home in a studio room. I'm often up late, and last week I was just doing some laundry at around 11 p.m.-ish when I saw a man sitting in the lobby. I saw him around a bit at night, but I didn't think much of it. Anyway, I'm in the laundry room. I just put my clothes in the dryer, I think, and I hear the laundry room door beeping, which meant that someone was coming in. There was the man, standing there with no clothes to wash, just sort of staring at me. I maneuvered around him and headed to the lifts. He followed me quickly and cornered me and asked for my Snapchat. I was tired and I just wanted to get back to my room, so I stupidly gave it to him. I figured that he'd message and try and flirt a bit, and I'd say, "I have a boyfriend. Sorry if you thought that this was anything else," and that would be the end of it. I'm about 5'4" with very long red hair, and I'm half Indian and English with Afghanistani descent, so I'm white passing, I guess, but kind of exotic. But people tend to stare at me a bit because I look a bit different. Anyway, he starts messaging me. It's kind of normal, but then he starts saying weird stuff like, "I saw you a month ago and I was impressed. I've been visiting a friend and staying here, and I've been watching you. I noticed that you come out mostly at night." He told me that he was Saudi Arabian and only visiting for 5 more days. But then it gets worse. He then says, "I love you, I can't help it." And then I say I have a boyfriend, and he says, "I only want you," and continues to completely ignore that. He asks to come to my room, and I said no. Then apparently he wanted a hug. He asked me if I lived alone and if I was a virgin. He kept saying that he loved me and that I was perfect for him, that I impressed him. At that point, I recorded all the messages on Snapchat, spoke to him a little bit more to gather evidence so that I could take it to the reception in the morning, because apparently he's been watching me for a month. I got my guy friend who lives on the 2nd floor to walk me down to the laundry room too. We sat in the student lounge area, and my friend calmed me down. I was shaking with adrenaline and fear at this point, but we saw him around the laundry room again looking for me, but luckily I'd already picked it up. I ran back to my room, and my friend says that I can stay in his room, but I said that it's okay, I'll just lock my door. Then it's about 1 a.m. and I hear someone outside of my room trying to get in by sort of fiddling with the doorknob. I asked my friend if he was outside of my room, and he messaged back, no. And at that, I just froze. I didn't want to make a sound, but I felt sick in my stomach and completely helpless. Thankfully, eventually it stopped, and whoever it was, they must have left. In the morning, I reported this to the reception, and then I went to stay a few days with my boyfriend. Then after that, I went to London to visit a friend, and last night was the first time that I'd spent a night in my room since this happened. But I'm very paranoid now. Sadly, I should probably be used to this, but yeah, it is what it is. It's not the first time that I've been harassed like this. In fact, one guy tried to kiss me in a club by grabbing my head, and a bunch of other things have happened that I won't get into here. But anyway, I'm pretty afraid to go outside of my room after dark. I'm constantly looking over my shoulder and feeling paranoid. I just keep blaming myself for being too nice, and I know it's my long thick hair that attracts people's eyes to me. I just want to cut it all off at this point. But has anybody else had a similar experience, and how did you deal with it? Reception still hasn't updated me on if he's still in the building, so I think I'll go and talk to them in the morning and see how everything is going. This was a few years ago in my old house, around Halloween. One day, I, a 43-year-old male, was home alone in my house. I have a wife, 3 kids and a dog. I'm in my basement cutting wood and working, when all of a sudden I hear thumping on the ceiling above me, first level floor. It's rhythmic and almost perfectly in beat. I'm a handyman and do a lot of my own fixing and know the usual sound houses make. This was not usual. I start to follow the thumping around the first floor. It's as if someone or something is walking around. I call out my wife's name. No answer. My kids. No answer. Just soft moaning that is getting louder with the thumps. My dog is with me in the basement and following the sound with me, with his tail straight up, completely silent. This was weird too because I have a very loud and sort of jumpy dog. I then slowly follow the thumping to the steps, and I hear a weak old woman's voice calling for Jimmy, not my name, but my name does start with a J, over and over. Ignoring my hellos, she keeps walking around my first floor, calling out, moaning and thumping. I grab my dog by the collar and leave out the basement door and walk around the outside of my house. It's worth noting too that I've had a lot of weird supernatural things happen in my life, especially around Halloween for some weird reason, but I could feel that this was different, very different. I go up the street and there's a younger couple calling out for someone. Let's say Nancy for the sake of this. I go up to them and say, "Are you Jimmy?" The young guy looks at me with simultaneous relief and confusion across his face. He tells me that that's his dad's name, but he passed years ago. Turns out, Nancy was his mum with some kind of mental issue. She snuck out of her house up the road. Her family lived in my house before we did, didn't know that, and she was having some kind of an episode, went looking for her husband in her home. Oh, and also, she had a wooden leg. I don't know the story, but that was the thumping. We got her home safely, and I also double-checked my doors from that point on, but I'm actually really glad that I didn't go up there, because who knows how she might have reacted with me, a stranger, allegedly being in her house. So let me start by saying that my brother and I are extremely experienced desert campers, and we have lived near deserts pretty much our whole lives. I have never in my 20 years of life, ever for 1 second, believed in anything paranormal or anything to do with evil spirits, unlike my brother, who has always sensed presences and been able to see mostly what we call jinn, also known as demons. That is, until last night, which is safe to say marks the last time that we will be camping alone in the desert. We always have the same place that we like to go when we want to camp with minimum effort, and our day started as normal. But as we got closer and closer to our destination, I saw my brother's mood completely shift. And when I asked what was wrong, he just sort of shrugged me off and told me to just keep driving. When we arrived, I felt completely fine, but my brother was still unusually quiet. It was around 1 p.m. at that point, and we were planning on leaving at around 12 or 1 a.m. Because of the heat, we made the terrible decision, though, to set up under a few trees and a source of water, which in Middle Eastern culture is where the jinns live at night. Not that I believed that at the time, of course. However, we still set up our camp and we continued on as normal. Now, my brother always says that when he feels a presence, or several in this case, he gets extremely unlucky. First, he almost dropped a box of coals on his foot. Then he spilled an entire bottle of Coke on his phone. Then he dropped it into the sand, then proceeded to smash his elbow on the edge of a chair that he was sitting on, which is now very swollen. And last but certainly not least, when he was looking through one of our boxes, he felt something cold and sharp press against his arm, and he realized that it was an unsheathed knife, which he packed with its case the previous night before, and he later said that it felt like something pushed his hand into it, right where his veins are. All of these events consecutively within a matter of a few hours was certainly making us both uneasy, and I, for the life of me, couldn't figure out why he was suddenly so unlucky. But as I was starting to question his clumsiness, a random couple appeared out of nowhere, informing us that they were stuck in the sand and needed some help. We drive a Land Cruiser and they had a Nissan Altima, so we didn't expect to encounter as many issues as we did, but we first dug them out without any issues. But as we pushed them out of the sand, they got stuck again. If you know anything about dune bashing or desert camping, then you understand the physics behind how wheels get stuck in the sand, and the way that this Nissan was stuck was incredibly unusual. It was literally stuck somewhere with plenty of space available for grip. And later on, my brother said that as we were digging them out of the sand, that's when he really started feeling like an evil presence around us, but didn't want to say anything as not to ruin the trip and freak me out, all these people. So we ended up having to tow them out of the sand, which again was far harder than it had to be. First, our tow strap broke off from the bumper. The tow strap cost $200 and was fine, but their bumper was slightly damaged. Then we almost got stuck ourselves, and a 20-minute job took more like 90, which again was extremely unusual and, with hindsight, just the beginning of everything that was to come. So when we got back to our camp, we noticed how everything around us had suddenly got really unusually quiet. The area that we were in has hundreds of birds around, and as far as we have seen, 3 cats who sometimes pay us a visit. But there wasn't a single noise at all, other than our fire, that is, which was dying out really quickly. It had gotten pretty dark quickly, so we had scrambled to build a fire to cook our dinner before we were asked to help the couple, and I had noticed the silence, but it didn't bother me. However, my brother suddenly grabbed my hand as we were sitting down to eat, and said with clear fear in his voice that we should go as quickly as possible and that he didn't feel safe. To ease both of our minds, we prayed. We're Christians, so of course we thought that it would help us. But I think it may have actually accelerated everything that happened that night, and just made whatever was out there with us very angry. So we quickly finished our dinner, and me being the skeptic, I was completely fine and pretty much humoring my brother, until I started getting this really nagging feeling that it was time to pack up and leave. It hit me like a wave too, and I was quite taken aback by the feeling, so I voiced it to my brother, and he agreed that we should pack up right away and that we should leave. So we started packing up at a normal pace, like we were just tired and wanted to leave. And that's when we heard a sound very close to us, on the opposite side of the pond, which wasn't that big, that I could only describe as the sound of, I don't know, like death itself. And it seemed to go on for several minutes, and when I say that we looked at each other in absolute fear, I genuinely mean that I was about to have a heart attack, I think, right there and then. At that point, after being frozen for a few minutes, and quite reasonably so, after hearing that bellowing screech so close to us, we turned on the car, drove it back so that we could see better with the headlamps, and just started throwing everything into the car, without much care, but with a whole lot of urgency. And it was like after the screaming, that's when everything hit the fan. First, it was the sound of twigs snapping and footsteps all around us. Then it was the shadows behind the trees, and I tried everything to try and get those shadows to change shape, walking around the trees and moving the lights, but nothing. It looked like they were people just staring at us the whole time, and you could sort of feel it too. We really felt like we weren't alone and that whatever was out there wasn't friendly. We also noticed all 3 cats were huddled right behind our car, away from the trees, so they were not the ones snapping the twigs, but literally did not care if they were not going to move, as I was still getting out of there. Thankfully, they left when we started reversing, but they too looked absolutely terrified, and were just staring at the trees too. It also felt like whatever was there was getting closer as well, and I have never felt anything like that. It's hard to explain, but it was sort of like, I don't know, like a gut feeling, and you just know it's one of those natural instincts that you should not ignore. Thankfully, we were able to pack up quickly. Our tent was very close to the trees though, so that was nerve-wracking. And whilst we were packing, it was still very eerily silent. It's very normal for birds around that area to continue making sounds until like 2 or 3 in the morning. And at this point, it was about 8 p.m, so it was highly unusual. In any case, I personally think that it was the most terrifying thing as I was driving away back onto the main dirt path to leave the desert. I know cars very well, I know how they drive in the sand, and I know our car especially well because we've had it for so long, and I could instantly tell that the steering was off and completely fighting against me, which eventually fixed itself the second that we were on the highway. The sound of twigs snapping was still all around us, and it was loud enough to be heard over the sounds of the car even, and on the path was what seemed to be like every bird that was in the area, just standing there and staring at us until we got close enough to force them to walk away, not even fly. At one point, my brother just grabbed my shoulder and told me very sternly to just keep looking in front of me, and under no circumstances to look through his window. It was his tone of voice that told me that I needed to listen to him. We were in a part of the desert where we had to pretty much drive through the whole of the accessible areas to get onto the highway, and there wasn't a single person around us. The only thing that we saw was a very clearly abandoned Toyota Hilux positioned behind a small dune and hidden behind the trees, but was far enough from our campsite to easily be ruled out as the source of the original screech. But the worst thing that I saw was when we were closing in on the exit. Now, we know these deserts very well. We've both grown up here and have been riding dirt bikes and quad bikes in these deserts since we moved here, and we know what wildlife to expect. Cats, birds, spiders, goats, even camels, mice, foxes sometimes, maybe even the occasional scorpion, or if you're really unlucky, a snake. But that is pretty much it. There's really not much else in these deserts, and we saw standing in the middle of the path, staring directly at us, a deer of all things. A deer. I've only ever seen one deer in 16 years of living here, and that was in someone's garden as a pet. It's safe to say, though, that I was in complete shock, and the deer was not moving as well, until I got so close that we could practically smell that thing, before it just slowly walked off the path whilst looking right at us. We quickly moved past the deer, and again my brother, with a gasp and then very sternly, said to keep my eyes right on the road. I asked him as we got on the highway what it was that he kept seeing, and he very reluctantly told me that he kept seeing large figures around us any time that we went through a bend, and that they were all either pointing right at us or ahead of us. To be honest too, I'm pretty glad that he didn't tell me at the time, because I don't know how I would have reacted while I was driving. And well, we still were yet to encounter anyone, but we could still very clearly hear sounds all around us. And again, not the usual bird or cat, but very clearly big and unrelenting as well. When I saw the exit though, I was as happy as I'd ever been. But that quickly faded when, once again, we saw another deer standing right in the middle of the road, slowly walking away and looking right at us. Except this time, it didn't really look like a deer. I don't know what it was, to be honest, but it sort of looked more like a kangaroo mixed with a deer, and its eyes were really milky, and it sort of looked, I don't know, like rotten and really horrible. To be honest, I really didn't care much at this point. I just stepped on the gas, and fortunately, it had gotten out of the way just in time. Now, when you exit the desert here, you can either turn right onto a long stretch of highway, or you can go left and go through a small town, and take the back streets to a parallel highway. And as I was about to turn right, my brother, once again, with that same tone of voice, said go to the town and go to the right. Later, he once again said that he saw a line of fingers pointing ahead of us, so if we would have gone that way, we wouldn't have made it home in one piece. Thankfully, as we made it further and further away and closer to our home, the gut feeling of being watched was going away, And of course, having never experienced something like this before, I was distraught and I wanted to talk about it. My brother told me as we were going home that because we were alone, the jinn wanted to mess with us, that they wanted to scare us and most likely cause us harm, and that the way they get to you in such rural places is to force you to stop and then do whatever they want, which makes sense as to why there were so many animals on our path. He also said that they caused bad luck and he could feel them the second that we entered the desert that day, which explains his clumsiness all day as well, and that the car got stuck in such an unusual manner. This is also my younger brother by 3 years, and naturally, anytime he would have ever told me about this sort of thing, I always just dismissed it as him just scaring himself or a delusion or whatever, but I can excuse the sounds that we heard, even the shadows that we saw last night. I can excuse the gut feeling as just being scared, but I cannot excuse those 2 deer that we saw staring right at us, and I cannot excuse the car just randomly fighting against me as I was driving like that. The deer, though, completely freaked me out, as did the tone of my brother's voice, and it's safe to say that we are not going camping there ever again. It's also safe to say that I won't ever be dismissing my brother when it comes to things like this ever again. I'm really thankful that we made it home safely that day. So allow me to briefly explain the main characters of the story so as not to confuse you. The story involves me and my dad, and 2 interactions involving attempted abuse by my dad's older sister's stepson. One story takes place at his aunt's home, and the second one, and worse of the 2 stories, takes place at my dad's younger sister's home during a family gathering. So, my dad's older sister will be Aunt A, my dad's younger sister will be Aunt B. Aunt A's stepson is a 24-year-old step-cousin. At the time of encounter number 1, I was in kindergarten. At the time of encounter number 2, I was in 1st grade. So to be clear, although I was very young when these 2 encounters happened, I still have very vivid memories of them both. However, that being said, I do have a better recollection of the second encounter as a 1st grader better than the first. Now, at the time of the first encounter, I had only ever met this older step-cousin once, maybe twice prior. I don't remember specifically why my dad and I had been at my aunt's house, and I also don't remember exactly how this situation came about, but if I am remembering it correctly, I believe my dad had gone to the restroom and I went off, wandering around the large home looking for him. This went unnoticed by the rest of the adults in the house because they were drinking, something that my dad was never into. And all I remember next is that the older step-cousin had been tickling me and wouldn't stop. Now, when I say I was being tickled, that's all that I really recall. Perhaps it was more than that, and my limited understanding of such had me remember that it was tickling, or perhaps it was just that, tickling. Either way, I really don't think any of us would disagree that an adult man should be alone with a little girl tickling her and touching her like that. But I remember suddenly, my dad came flying in the room. I remember my dad said very loudly to the step-cousin, "What are you doing?" My step-cousin jolted, and then something along the lines of, "Uncle so-and-so, you're overreacting, I was just..." My dad cut him off and stated very coldly, "I'm not your uncle, I don't know you. Get up and put your coat and shoes on, because we're leaving." By this time, his dad, or step-uncle, Aunt A, and other relatives had begun gathering around the door where my dad had been standing. I can't really remember if I was alone in a room with him, like a bedroom or what, but I was on some sort of surface higher up that he was tickling me on. Looking back now, I can clearly see the look on my dad's face while all of his family was trying to convince him to calm down and stay. It's obvious to me that he was doing everything in his power not to blow up and traumatize me. He just kept looking at them with his lips pressed and shaking his head, saying, "I don't want to hear it." I briefly remember my dad asking me questions about the step-cousin in the car on the way home. I also remember him explaining to me that I should not be alone with any adult, especially a male adult, no matter if they're family or not, but also making sure that I knew that I didn't do anything wrong, nor was what just happened in any way my fault. My dad did not talk to his family for a year or so after that, give or take. I was too young to know or understand why, just that they had a falling out. So, now to the next encounter. My dad had slowly started to speak with family again. It was summer and Aunt B's oldest child had just graduated from high school. Thus, my dad and I had been invited to the graduation party. Initially, my dad was not going to go when he found out that my step-cousin would be there, but his dad had called my dad and had an hour or two for conversations on the phone about my dad being mistaken by his interpretation of what had happened. I don't think that my dad believed him, but surely he felt that we would be at a big family event and this step-cousin would have to be literally out of his damn mind to try something in the same house as my dad for a second time. But for the first 2 or 3 hours at the graduation party, my dad kept me glued to his hip. There was a group of about maybe 13 other kids of varying ages, all running through Aunt B's house, backyard, front yard, and basement, and I remember staring longingly at them. My dad noticed, and so did a couple of other family members. I don't really remember who though, but I do remember my step-uncle and then my dad's older brother kind of busting him up about being overprotective and not letting me play with the other kids and all that. My dad tried to stick up for himself when one of them turned to look at me and said, "Baby girl, do you want to go and play with the other kids?" Of course I said yes, and then looked at my dad for approval. Now that I'm older and that I'm a parent myself, I understand the kind of face that my dad was making. He had a look of contemplation. He surely felt uneasy and wanted to protect me and keep me by his side, but I could also see the dilemma that he was having in my mind now that I voiced my desire to do so. Some lady interjects and says something along the lines of, "Oh my gosh, you're not going to be able to keep her locked up forever, you know. Let the girl play. Look how many of us are here. What's going to happen?" So finally, I was given the okay by my dad, who showed me where he would be and how much time I had to play freely. For the first 20 minutes or so, we were all running in a group all through the different doors of the house. I think this made my dad feel better because he could see me every few minutes too. Finally though, some of the older kids suggested that we go down to the basement to see what Aunt B had done to it. It was unfinished the last time that I had seen it beforehand, and apparently it now had carpet, the walls are painted, there was a game room, and then a living room that shaped into a sort of private wing to the right-hand side of the other end of the stairs, where the bedroom was. There was no wall or door separating the bedroom from the living room section. However, it still provided some privacy. Once we saw the new setup, we all began going back upstairs, me being the last in the line. As we were walking up the stairs though, I see my 24-year-old step-cousin, who was now walking down the stairs. He grabbed me by my shoulder and said, "Oh hey, I hope you're not leaving. I was just coming down to show you something really cool that Aunt B put down here." His voice had a high and exciting pitch. It was a tone of voice that I would find highly unsettling today should I hear a man talk this way to a kid that he hardly knew. By the time that he had finished making that comment to me about the cool thing that he wanted to show me, all the other kids were already gone. I remember looking up towards the top of the stairs and then back at him, and he grabbed me by my hand to lead me down. "Come on, you'll love it." I recall feeling very put off by this, but also feeling too small and too little to say or do otherwise. I also think that a part of me may have felt kind of cool that someone so much older wanted to show me something, a little kid after all. This is the first time that I can remember being allowed to go off on my own for any length of time, and so I was on that high of independence, I guess. He immediately walks me down past the couch and the TV setup, and towards the bedroom part of the basement. I remember him using his hand to pat on the bed while teasing, "So, do you want to try it out? See how good of a bed it is? Go on." I climbed on the bed and immediately started jumping and bouncing as high as I could. Looking back, I remember his face getting frustrated because I was not doing what he was expecting me to do. He tried sitting on the bed and he tried laying down, but I wouldn't stop jumping, and once he laid, I got down. He kept picking me up though with his hands under my armpits and placing me back on the bed, and saying that he wanted to lay with me and take a nap, which I responded by saying that no, I don't take naps with boys. He then starts asking me questions about my dad. Do you ever sleep in bed with your daddy? Only if I ever had a bad dream, I replied. What kind of things do you and your dad do, or where do you guys lay together, because I know how close you and him are. Oh yes, I love my daddy. Daddy and I like to lay on the couch together and watch movies. This statement from me clearly went off like a light bulb in his head, because that's when he leads me from the bed back towards the couch in the living room section. He then lays down on his side, prompting me to lay down with him and pull me closer to him. He would lay me down on my side in front of him and tried to unbuckle my jeans when I would jump up. He had at some point unfastened his own jeans and unzipped his zipper. I was too young to understand what was going on, but I knew something was wrong, and I remember saying something about my daddy not being happy about this to him. He was in the middle of trying to tell me that he had asked my dad if he could do this with me, and my dad said that it was okay, when suddenly I hear my dad yelling and stomping down the stairs, and man, was he absolutely furious. None of you know where she is, he was saying. Last time any of you kids saw her was in the basement with that guy. I jumped off the couch one more time as my dad was making an appearance in the stairway. He took one look at me and one look at this 24-year-old man who had been alone with me for who knows how long, and just said calmly, "You and expletives," before charging at him, punching him in the face, dragging him back up from the floor by his neck. My dad had one arm around his throat while he used the other to point in his face while screaming at him. He was screaming, I knew it, over and over again. He was also screaming, "That's my daughter," over and over again. When suddenly, my dad had his two older brothers and my step-cousin's dad on his back, pulling him off of this guy. I remember that they ended up ripping my dad's shirt off of him because my dad just wouldn't let go, and he wouldn't stop screaming that he was going to kill him. Finally, he looked around the room and said, "I'm done with you, all of you. How dare you?" And he then said, "Let's go, baby," before scooping me up and taking me to my car seat. We drove off and we quickly stopped at the gas station. I remember my dad wiping something from his eyes. I remember him apologizing to me for letting me go off on my own and asking me if he scared me. Although Aunt A stayed with his creepy father and remains married to him today, the step-cousin was never invited to another family function again. My dad and I did not see or speak to that side of my family for 6 years, and it was never the same again. Remember, guys, it's not always strangers you have to look out for. It's actually the people that are closest to you that are sometimes the most dangerous. Several years ago, a friend and I went on a multi-day hiking trip during winter. While preparing for the trip, I found a forum dedicated to the trail that we'd be hiking and several threads about people going missing on it. Most of the members blamed the hikers themselves, saying they were most likely inexperienced would-be adventurers who had went off trail and gotten lost. There was one old man on the forum who claimed that he completed the trail once a year for the past 50 or so years, and he believed that there was something more sinister behind these disappearances. Naturally, the other members laughed at him. We set off before sunrise to get as many miles in as possible on the first day. That entire day, we only met one other person, a friendly middle-aged man who lived somewhat locally. He seemed impressed, though, that we were taking on the trail in winter, and even invited us to camp near his property, but we declined and pressed on. But that night, we were surprised by some pretty dangerous terrain around the edge of a lake and took the decision to sleep in our bivy sacks under an overhanging rock. Not exactly ideal camping conditions, but given the potential hazards, we felt that this was the smartest choice. Now, I don't sleep well at the best of times in a bivy sack, and if you've ever been zipped into one, you'll know how claustrophobic it can feel. The rock hanging over my head didn't help either, but a few hours after, I did eventually manage to fall to sleep. but I woke suddenly to the sound of my friend shouting and swearing at me. I popped my head out of my bivvy and saw that he was still sipped inside of his and had somehow gotten off the relatively level ground that we had been sleeping on and was slowly sliding down towards the lake. I quickly got up and dragged him, with great effort, back up to the level ground. He was absolutely furious with me, claiming that he'd felt me drag him, but soon calmed down and accepted that he'd most likely roll over repeatedly in his sleep. We didn't go back to sleep that night, and instead had some coffee and breakfast while waiting for the sun to come up. When we did set off, it started to rain heavily and didn't stop for almost the whole day. I was also having some trouble with an old injury in my leg, which slowed us down considerably. The sun seemed to disappear rather suddenly near the top of a deceptively steep hill as well, so we set up camp there, and then, this time, in a tent. After the rough couple of days, we were grateful to be inside of a tent, and the ground underneath us was actually not too bad as well. We talked and joked about the trip so far, and for some reason I remember my friend expressing his disappointment that he'd forgotten to pack his iPad, and then we tried to sleep. Soon after, though, I began to hear what sounded like human footsteps. I thought to myself, surely there isn't anybody else out here climbing this hill at night. The sound continued, and the more intently I listened, the more I became certain of what I was hearing. I poked my head out of the tent, and the sound suddenly stopped. I got out to pee, and I looked around, but there wasn't a soul in sight. Shortly after getting back into my sleeping bag, the footsteps started again, but this time they started circling our tent. By this point, I must admit that I was pretty frightened, and I asked my friend, "Are you hearing this?" And he responded, "Yes, I am," knowing that he'd been hearing them the entire time, and sounded as freaked out as I did. It genuinely terrified me. We got out of the tent again, and asked if anybody was there, but again, there was no one around, and the sound had stopped instantly. The footsteps around the tent continued for quite some time, and we didn't sleep. As soon as the sun came up, we packed up our things, got off the trail, and hiked to the nearest village, got a cab to the nearest town, and we made our way home. We've never been able to find a convincing explanation of what could have been causing the sound of the footsteps that night, and my friend has since become a full-fledged missing person, paranormal, and conspiracy enthusiast. So my uncle's house was made from nothing, but the place where it had been abandoned for a long time before he started building. I have so many stories from that place, to me, that prove that it's indeed haunted, but I'll begin with the oldest one that I can remember, before there even was a house there. So right next to the house, there's a kindergarten there. I went there as a kid, just like my mum and her brothers before me. There was always a playground legend too about a man in a military uniform who called the kids to go behind the school, and then they would disappear. Even as a kid, I remember being so afraid of going to that particular place behind the school, but as I grew, I stopped thinking about it. Fast forward a few years though, and my uncle's house had just been finished. One night, when I was out doing laundry with my cousin, I decided that I wanted to see the kindergarten from above, as it had been years since I'd seen it. So we go into the balcony and get a really good view of the place, and after a few seconds, I noticed somebody walking in between the classrooms in the back of the school. I couldn't see their face, but my whole body tensed as I saw the shadow go through the wall and then disappear behind the school. I remembered the story from my childhood at that moment, and still wonder if that is the same man the kids saw back then. Most of the paranormal experiences that I've had, they've been with said cousin that I mentioned earlier, so I do believe her when it comes to paranormal things that she's told me that happened in my uncle's house. And one of the scariest ones for her was a time when she had just come home from school and wanted to ask her aunt, Sarah, if they were going to be eating in her grandparents' house or if they would be staying there. So she goes to the bottom of the stairs and yells, "Aunt Sarah, are you there?" To which Sarah's voice responded, "Yes." Then my cousin yelled again, "Are we going to go to Grandma's?" But nobody answered after that. After a few minutes without a response, my cousin went to the second floor and started looking for Sarah. But there was absolutely nobody there. Not a single person. She then called her on the phone, only to find out that they had all gone to her grandparents' house and were waiting for her to go as well. Well, she ran out of there and didn't come back for weeks as she was too afraid of the voice that she heard. I wasn't present when this happened, obviously, but it's important to the next story because I was there for this one. So after that, and a bunch of other paranormal things happening to her and our family, they decided that they were going to call a priest to bless the house and invited everyone to pray and later hang out with them. My family was there, the 20 plus people in the backyard, as the priest blessed the house. We were all praying and singing, happy and united, when suddenly, just as the priest was going to climb the stairs to the second floor, a loud voice boomed down as if it was coming from where we were standing, and it said, "Go away." My 14-year-old self was shaking with fear instantly, but the lady that was directing the prayer yelled at us to pray louder and take each other's hands. A lot of people were crying with horror at what we had just witnessed, because it was definitely paranormal, and that has to be one of the scariest things that I've ever lived through. And because of that, I'm convinced that there is something horrible hiding in my uncle's house. Me and my girlfriend live in a calm and small city, so we're used to walking alone, even late at night, from her house to mine or vice versa. A few years ago, when we were 18 or 19 years old, we were going to her house alone, walking. There was nobody on the streets, and it was starting to get dark at this point. We were chatting about something and making jokes when we decided to walk by a different route, just to change the usual path up a bit. We were walking for 15 minutes, more or less, when we started to feel a little lost and thought, hey, this isn't the way home. And at this same instant, too, we heard a loud whistle as someone was whistling to get our attention. We turned back and we saw this, clown. He was there, standing still, looking at us and smiling, but something was really off. His clothes were kind of ragged. He had 3 balloons floating tied to his hand, and in the other hand, he had a huge butcher's knife. We thought that it was some kind of a joke at first, like it seemed to be out of a horror movie or something. I said, "Hello, how are you?" because I really didn't know what to do. He then proceeds to whistle a kid's song and walk slowly towards us. Well, as you might have figured too, we were terrified by this, and we started to back up a bit, and then we ran away from that thing. He didn't run though, at least, we didn't see him run, but every time that we thought that we were away from it, he would just reappear around the corner of another street. We couldn't find anybody else in the streets, and it was getting dark at this point. We ran again and hid behind some trees for half an hour or more. Then we proceeded to look for the right path back to a house, and we saw him once again when we were already far from the place that we had hid. But he had his back to us at this point, so he didn't see us. After that, we thought, well, it must have been someone just playing a prank on random people or something. We then saw on the news a week later that someone had been attacked by a clown. Not severely hurt, thankfully, but still. The police were looking for this clown, but couldn't find him anywhere. I hazard a guess that in our small town, that it must have been the same person. So, I'm a tradie in my 30s, and I have a female partner that is a bit younger than me. I live in Queensland, Australia, and last year during Christmas holidays, we decided to have a 10-day trip with a camper van around state. After exploring the beach side of the state, we decided to go inland. We camped overnight in a lookout over a gorge with a great view. There were 2 more campers, so not a busy spot. Unfortunately, though, it started raining, so we waited to explore the next day. It started to get dark, and when we woke up, I saw that the number of the campers didn't change as rain continued during the next day. That was a bit disappointing, but we still decided to go explore the top of the mountain range, a long narrow hilltop that was a short distance from the camping spot, just a few minutes walking. Our destination was probably only about maybe an hour there and back, and had some man-made stairs at the beginning of the trail. They were basically just rocks, but there were also big stones positioned in sort of the natural tiles in the ground every now and there, not in a regular pattern or anything, random and scarce, but I would estimate they'd probably weigh about 100 kilos and were mostly flat with the rest of the terrain deep in the ground. On both sides of the narrow range were very steep sides, definitely not accessible, but they had a great view of the surrounding dense forests all the way that you could see anyway. What I'm trying to paint here is that, basically, we were in the middle of nowhere. The way to the end of the range, though, was through some obstacles, where I had to help my girlfriend climb up some big rocks and other stuff. Once we made it to the end, there was a sharp end and a drop-off into the gorge beneath. But we took some pictures and decided to go back to our RV eventually. We still haven't seen or heard anyone, and the path from the beginning to the end was very narrow with the visibility of both sides, so no one could have walked past us. Of course, there were trees and other obstacles on the path. We could not see much back from where we came from, but what we noticed on the way back were some of those large stones mentioned before. They were missing. You could see the fresh holes in the ground too, and we definitely would have seen them missing on the way in the first time, as there was only one way there and back. I would say that there were about maybe 10 plus of them missing across the whole way back, and they were not from the same spot. There were maybe, 50 altogether, randomly positioned. For the life of me too, I just cannot explain how someone could dig them up and carry them back to their truck or something in that time. And I mean, even if someone decided that they wanted it in their garden or something, it's just not humanly possible to lift them like that. Now, this experience was, I think, the next day or maybe the one after in a different place of the same national park. It was called Carnarvon National Park. It's a massive range connected to other state forests and parks and whatnot. The weather didn't improve either, and we didn't see many people in our next destination either. There were only 2 or 3 cars on which is usually a very popular spot. We decided to take a hike anyway of one of the indicated routes showed on the map. Most were leading to different parts, and some even divided further. I would guess that we were about 3 hours in, and we decided that we'd had enough, combined with the weather, and seen what we wanted to, and so we were about to turn back when we walked past a route that was blocked off by a sort of fencing and with a warning sign that said, "Closed due to flooding and inaccessible road." It was a route that would stretch for another 20 kilometers, but I've seen that there was a small waterfall just close, maybe around 1 kilometer away that way, so I persuaded my girlfriend to go. She was hesitant at first, not trusting the sign, but eventually she agreed. We walked around the blocked entrance easily, was only walking around a few trees to the side, and continued on the path. I should mention too that I carry a machete in my backpack along with some emergency stuff like snacks and water. Call me paranoid, but hey, I'd rather have it and not need it than need it and not have it, right? Anyway, after about 20 or 30 meters of walking, we reached that little waterfall. On the way there were some fallen trees on the path that we had to climb over, as walking around just wasn't always possible. It started to drizzle again, a bit stronger this time, so we decided to go back after we reached our destination. We took a few pictures, spent a few minutes, and I will say again that we did not see anyone that day, since the handful of people at the beginning of the car park at the very bottom, they went a different route. We started walking back after a few minutes when I just suddenly felt this feeling like we were being watched. In fact, I stopped and felt the hair on my arm standing up. It was a feeling like something wanted to harm us. Now, my girlfriend doesn't really believe stuff like that, and definitely doesn't understand why I would carry a machete into the forest, unless planning to cut through the jungle, of course, but this is Australia. We don't have access to guns like you guys do in the States. So I told her that we should go faster, and that I just don't feel safe. After a few minutes of walking with me constantly looking around, I stopped and decided to take my Crocodile Dundee knife out. Once I did this, I decided to whistle. I don't know why. Maybe it was to just break the silence, to maybe scare something away. And not like we have bears here or anything. It wasn't a long-tone whistle, or rather a few short melodic sort of like whistles. And at first, nothing happened, so we continued walking with my knife in hand, and after a very short time, I would say 10 seconds, we then heard the same whistle come back at us. Now, the visibility from the footpath is quite decent being on the bottom between the hills like this, going along a small creek, and I can tell you that there was no one that we could see. My hair on my arm started to raise again, and my girlfriend finally acknowledged that something just wasn't right, and started walking fast without me hustling her. I think she felt it too, but we had to make it to the entrance section that was blocked and then back to the main track without any further incident. And all the way there, I felt just like I was being watched and not wanted there at all. As soon as we did make it to the normal trail, all feelings of being threatened subsided, and eventually we made it back and we just packed up and we left. So, the first thing happened a few months ago. I couldn't find my house keys one evening, despite them always hanging on the hanger next to the front door. My husband, daughter, and I turned the house upside down looking for them, but there was nothing. My husband left me his door key and he went off to work the next morning. My daughter went to school and I went to work, arriving home about lunchtime. I let myself in the door and then went to hang my husband's keys on the hook next to the door, as is my habit. And I literally jumped because my keys were on the hanger. The second thing only happened this past weekend. My daughter left her attic bedroom and went to stay at her dad's house on Sunday at about, I would say, 3 p.m. She went from there to school on the Monday morning, then got home to my house at about 4:30 p.m. Monday. She went straight to her room to get changed, but came flying back downstairs with a face like thunder. "You've been in my bedroom," she yelled. I told her calmly that I hadn't. I mentioned her having the attic bedroom as the steps are steep and I have arthritic knees, so I don't venture up there. So she believed me when I told her that I hadn't, but she went from furious to ashen-faced. "Why?" I asked. "Well, there's a lit candle on my desk." Just to mention a couple of things too. The candle was a small one, maybe like 5 centimeters tall, and not one that could be left burning for over 24 hours. There wasn't anything in her room that could have lit the candle as well. No matches, lighter, or anything. No one was home except for me the entire time, and I know that I didn't go up there. Okay, so I know that this is a really weird one, but bear with me. I hope that you guys can give me some perspective or insights into what you guys think this might be. When I was growing up, my family lived in this huge, beautiful southern-style home, and I really loved it. I have very fond memories there. However, it was the most active home of all that I've lived in since. Very active. But only to my mother and I. You see, my two brothers and my dad, they never had any experiences. My mother had a couple. I was the only girl though, and about 3 when we moved in, and I had a lot. At first, being so young, I didn't really think anything of the experiences. I didn't know any better. Later though, I'd find out that they were not what other people see or interact with normally. But I'll tell you guys all the one that mostly stands out. One night, I woke up and I rolled over. I was barely awake and it was dark in the room. I didn't have a nightlight. But I noticed that there was some sort of a black thing lingering at the foot of my bed. I couldn't make it out right then, so I sat upright in my bed and tried to make it out, but I still couldn't really, so I got on my knees and leaned toward it. Now, remember, the whole room is dark, but I can clearly see that there's something there. It's not a figure, it's just sort of suspended in darkness. As I leaned towards it, within like 2 feet I would guess, it looks a lot like a hand, but not a hand because it only has 3 fingers, bent slightly as if they were just sort of hanging there. It had no fingernails but pointy tips. It wasn't connected to any body either. I just sort of leaned back against my bed frame and watched it until eventually I just fell back asleep because it never moved. This happened a couple more times, but it seemed to be closer to me each time. Then one night, my cousin stayed over and she slept with me. I woke up and rolled over to face her, and it was right there in my face, hanging directly over her as she slept. It had never been that close before, and I was scared, but I could actually reach out and touch it, and a part of me wanted to. I reached my arm out and then just sort of pulled it back, and in the end, I never did touch it. I just sort of watched it until, again, I just fell asleep. But that was the last time that I saw it. Fast forward 10 years though, and I was helping my mum in the kitchen with supper. As we were talking, that old house came up somehow, and I finally told her what I saw, and she immediately stopped what she was doing. She asked me more. Then she took 2 pieces of paper out and asked me to draw it. While she was doing something on the other piece of paper, and when I finished, she finished. She asked that we swap papers, and we did, and she had, for all intents and purposes, drawn the exact same thing. We both just sort of looked at each other in amazement. She then told me that when she was little, she had went to a slumber party and all the girls slept on the living room floor in sleeping bags. She said that she woke up in the middle of the night and saw this claw thing hanging over the girl next to her. She reached out to touch it, and before she did, the girl screamed loudly. Everyone woke up and the girl was crying and saying someone had pinched her. My mum was accused of doing this, of course, but she swore that she never would have done such a thing. But this girl had clearly been pinched hard enough to even draw blood. I've done some research on this, and honestly, I haven't been able to come up with anything like this. So, what do you guys think? I live in the foothills of Western NC near the base of the Blue Ridge. I lived in the mountains for a few years and I hated it up there. I despise the woods with a burning passion. Yet, just my luck, I've moved back in with my folks, in their cabin surrounded by woods. The land my family owns stretches across about 15 acres of woodland. Now, these are the woods that I grew up in, and despite my typical aversion to nature, I feel pretty safe in them. I climbed the trees and splashed in the creek and played with stick swords when I was a kid there, so these woods are sort of like home. Except for the area behind the backyard. You see, our cabin is positioned at the top of a pretty steep hill that slopes down for about half a mile before it bottoms out at a creek down in the woods. The halfway point between the house and the creek is this little patch of woods, right behind the fenced-in area around the house. It's always in shade, no thick undergrowth, just, trees. Carolina red clay, piles of leaves, the usual. But it just feels really weird down there in a way that it's hard to explain. I feel very unwelcome out behind the house, and I'm not the only one. My parents avoid it too. Even our pets, past and present, have always steered clear of it. Anyway, I'm going to share some experiences that should help to get my point across better. I was about 8 or 9, and one summer thought that I'd try camping in the backyard. I set up my family's unused tent, loaded it up with an air mattress and a pile of blankets. Copper was there too, my beloved deer stuffy, and some comic books. I guess I wanted to be excited about it, but even before the sun went down, when Mum was helping me set up my little camping trip, I just felt really uneasy. The shady patch of woods around the backyard was just weird, but I was a kid, so I figured, to heck with it. I'm 20 feet from the house anyway. I'll be fine. I was not fine. I got set up for the night, stayed up reading comics, felt like an outdoorsman, and it had barely gotten dark when I began hearing loud, rhythmic crunching in the woods behind the backyard. Like something big was walking in circles around the undergrowth. We don't have bears in my neck of the woods. Besides, whatever it was definitely walking on 2 legs. It never tried to approach the backyard. Even as I sat there with Copper just listening to it, it just kept walking. In the end, I barely lasted an hour in that tent before running inside and getting into my own bed. Now, my mum is an avid gardener, and she decided one day that she was going to put together 4 or 5 raised garden beds in the backyard for herbs and veggies. This was when I was 11ish, I think, so naturally I was roped in to help. We spent the first part of the spring just putting them together and getting them started, and I began noticing that both of us would get really edgy and irritable back there. We're best friends, and we never fight, but we'd be snapping at each other constantly, raising that garden. I also noticed for the first time that the woods behind the house were deathly quiet. Playing music or talking didn't make a difference too. It was that kind of silence that presses in on you, and it's just always back there. To our surprise though, the beds actually thrived for a little while, but Mum would always ask me to come with her when she tended to them. I thought that it was silly at the time, but when I got older, she told me that she just couldn't be down there by herself. She'd wait until I was home from school before checking on them because she too felt uneasy and unwelcome down there. Eventually, we just abandoned the project too. It got so bad, but the raised beds are still down there, just rotting away in the undergrowth. Haven't checked on them since middle school, and I'm 23 now. And lastly, and in my opinion the creepiest, was the time that I asked my mum to cut my hair. We were poorer then, so rather than go to a salon, Mum just gave me a twice-a-month trim. It was late spring and warm, so she suggested that we cut it in the backyard for easier cleanup. I was maybe 13 or 14 at this point. So we ventured down, I brought a stool and sat diligently while she cut my hair. Side note too, my mum has always cut my hair, so she's really good at it. She doesn't make mistakes, and this is important. So as she worked, we talked, and I noticed that old familiar feeling of unease again. We were not welcome back there all of a sudden, and the trees stood still and shadowy despite the brilliant sunny day, and I remember that it was just really, really cold. Mum finished up my haircut, and I shook off the extra debris to let her admire her handiwork. She stepped around in front of me, angled my head this way and that, said it looked good, and then 3 things happened in very quick succession. First, I felt this squeeze of pressure on my lungs, like I couldn't breathe. It was such a weird sensation that I just froze. All of the uneasiness of the atmosphere pressed in on me all at once. Second, my mum got this really weird vacant look on her face. I remember her smile fading and her eyes going a little glassy, like she was lost in thought or something. And then she reached out with the scissors, still making this empty expression, and snipped a deep cut into the skin right over my left eye. I, obviously freaked out, jumped down off the stool and backed away. At the same time, she seemed to gather herself again, and she was almost in tears. She apologized over and over again, not even bothering to take anything with us as we ran back to the house to treat the cut and stop the bleeding. I still have a little scar there, in fact, and she's never really forgiven herself for it. There wasn't even any hair hanging over that eye or anything either. I had a pixie cut at the time. So yeah, a few of the many weird experiences that makes me avoid the backyard now, and I haven't been down there in like 7 or 8 years. But now that I'm living here again, I just sometimes look into the backyard and feel that weird shudder of apprehension again. And I mean, what's the deal, right? Why don't we feel welcome in a 50 square foot patch of land that we own? Why is it so dark there all the time and quiet? I have no idea, but my parents and I just work around it and pretend like it isn't there.